Right. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members, any members of the public that are joining us this morning. I'd like to welcome you to today's meeting of the Scrutiny Commission. As is usual, the meeting is being broadcast live to the public. For those not able to watch live, the webcast will be recorded and will be made available for viewing on the County Council's website after the meeting. I confirm that all members of the Scrutiny Commission and officers presenting today are joining online. Before we go any further, can I now ask that members introduce themselves? I've been advised that we've got one substitute today, and that's Mrs. Maggie Wright, and she's attending in the place of Mr. Harrison, who's unable to join us today. I'd also point out that this is the first meeting. We've had lots of meetings online under the COVID rules and so on, but this is the first meeting of the Scrutiny Commission when we've pulled together the Mtfs. That's, as far as I know, has ever been done online as opposed to done in a room with us all sitting there. So we are in that sense making history today. But if members would like to introduce themselves, I'll call your name, and if you can just confirm you're here. Mr. Barclay.
Good morning. My name's Tom Barclay. I'm County Councillor for Syst and Ridgeway.
Thank you, Tom. Mr. Bedford.
Morning, Peter Bedford, one of the 4 Scrutiny Commissioners and County Councillor for Markfield, Desford and Thornton.
Mr. Bill.
Good morning, everybody. David Bill here, speaking from snowy but sunny Hinckley.
Thank you, David. Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair. Terry Einan. I'm one of the 4 Scrutiny Commissioners and a member for Colville North.
Dr. Feltham.
Thank you, Chairman. Kevin Feltham. I'm the County Councillor for the Gartree Division, and I'm also Chairman of the Health Overview Scrutiny Committee.
Mrs. Fryer.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, everybody. I'm Hilary Fryer. I'm the Chair of Children and Families, and I represent Quorn and Barrow Division.
Thank you. Mrs. Page.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Rosita Page, Deputy Commissioner, and I represent the Lutterworth Division.
Thank you, Rosita. Alan Pearson. Are you with us, Alan?
Well,
Keep clicking it.
He's muted. Alan, you're muted.
We can see you.
Oh, you're unmuted now, Alan. Oh, no, you're muted again.
Oh, yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. It's just a bit sticky button.
Okay.
Alan Pearson, Melton West, and Chair of Transport and Environment.
Thank you, Alan. Mr. Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Terry Richardson, Chair of Adults and Community, representing Narborough and Whetstone.
Thank you, Terry. Mrs. Wright.
Maggie Wright, representing Stony Stanton and Croft, substituting for Mr. Harrison.
Thank you. And Mr. Wyatt.
Michael Wyatt for the Warren Hills Ward.
Thank you, Michael. So that completes the introductions.
Sorry, Chair, you didn't mention my name.
Oh, sorry, have I not called you, Bill?
No, you didn't. No.
Oh, my apologies. Bill Bolter, please.
Bill Bolter, South and West Wixton.
I'm sorry, that was in looking to press on. I apologise for that. And just to complete for the record, my name's Simon Galton. I'm County Councillor for the Lawn Division and Chairman of the Scrutiny Commission.
Chairman, it's Council again. I said my old ward division of Warren Hills. It's not. It's Colville South. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, so before we can begin, as is usual, again, can I remind officers and members to mute the microphones until they wish to speak or invited to speak. And if you are able to use the video camera, please turn that on for the duration of the meeting. If you do wish to speak, please ensure you use the raise your hand function and not the chat facility. Okay, So moving to item 1 then, the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 4th of November are taken as read, confirmed, and that you're happy that I sign them. All in agreement?
Agreed.
Nobody got any problems with that? Thank you. Item 2, question time. I've no questions to take today. On items 2 or 3, questions from members. Item 4, there are no urgent items to be taken elsewhere on the agenda today. Declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. I'll take the usual blanket interest from members that are double-hatted, that are members of either district councils, as we are discussing the budget and council tax issues, and any members that are also parish or town council members. Are there any other interests that members need to declare? None? Okay. Item 6, any declarations of the party whip today?
Chair, I did put
Yeah.
my hand up.
I'm sorry, Terry.
Just as there is a report on there from the LEP board, I just want to obviously report that I'm a LEP board member, which is in the final agenda item.
Yeah, okay, that's supporting the economic recovery report. Yeah,
It is indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's noted. I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. Right, so we've done declarations of the party whip, and I didn't hear anyone wishing to do that. Item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. Don't have any petitions. So that takes us to the substantive item on the agenda today. Item 8, the provisional medium-term financial strategy. Now, we'll cover this in the normal way, in that we will deal with the overall situation and the council's overall financial situation, and then we'll move on to look at individual departments for which this committee is responsible. That's the Chief Executive's department and the Corporate Resources department. But as I say, to start with the overall financial situation. Now, normally I would ask the Director of Resources, Chris Tambini, to introduce the report, but the lead member for Resources, Byron Rhodes, has contacted me and asked if he can make a statement at the beginning of this meeting, which I'm happy to enable him to do. Can I just check that we have everyone so we can flow into the next section? Can I check that we've got Chris Tambini, Declan Keenan, you both there?
Yeah, I'm here, Chair.
Yeah.
I'm
Are you
here
there,
as well,
Chris?
Chair.
Okay.
Please note that all of the reports are 2 pages out for reference if members going on to it. So on agenda item 8 starts on page 17, and then they are running all the way through 2 pages out. So if members and officers refer to a page. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Rosita. Okay, so can I just check we've got the Leader of the Council, Nick Rushton.
Good morning, Chairman.
Thank you, Nick. And Byron, I'm aware you're here because we had a brief discussion. So, Byron, you would like to make a statement to start us off this morning on the medium-term financial strategy and the budget.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. For the record, I'm Byron Rhodes. I'm the County Councillor for Beaver Division, and I'm also the Cabinet Lead Member for Resources and Finance. So, as you know, I requested by email to make this statement before Chris and Declan present the paper. The subject I wish to address is council tax. In this paper, and the one you saw in December relating to the medium-term financial strategy, it is proposed to increase council tax by 1.99% in each year of the plan. But you may also have noticed that after the first year, there is a forecast deficit which increases in each of the following 2 years. The cumulative gap over the 4 years, not including the provision for special educational needs and disabilities overspend, is 66 million. It is my judgment that we have to act to avoid that overwhelming the council. You'll be aware that the Chancellor and the Secretary of State for the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government have indicated that councils with responsibility for adult social care may, in addition to the capped limit of 2% council tax increase in 21-22, also increase the council tax by up to a further 3% taken in 1 year or over 2 years. This increase will be to safeguard adult social care, which, as you know, for the past 9 years has been and continues to be the council's priority. It would pay for most but not all of the growth in ASC costs. The additional revenue raised would also release resources to safeguard other services and avoid more severe and damaging cuts over the next 4 years. Should further income become available, it may enable the council to improve some services. Therefore, taking into account also the forecast deteriorating financial position and the uncertain prospects for further COVID-19 infection prevention measures as well, I shall advise the Cabinet at its meeting on the 5th of February to take up the option to increase the council tax by the full 3%, which is equivalent to £5.62 per month for a Bandy household, in addition to the 1.99% already proposed. If they agree, the approval of full council will be sought on the 17th of February.
Is that it, Byron?
That's it.
Okay, thank you very much. So basically your statement is indicating that it's the intention to take the council tax up to the maximum allowable amount, including the adult social care precept, and that you'll bring that forward through the Cabinet and then to full council.
Yeah, that's exactly the position.
Yeah. Okay, then I'm sure we'll go into that as part of the debate this morning, but thank you very much for that. So I'm now going to ask Chris Tambini, the Director of Corporate Resources, to start off and introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The announcement that Byron's just made is clearly going to help our medium-term position, and we'll be factoring that into the report that will go to Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time. But each 1% on the adult social care precept equates to 3.2 million, so kind of 9.6 million in total from that 3% increase. Declan is going to take you through the details of the report. I just want to make a couple of comments about the short and longer term prospects and really focus on the uncertainty within this budget. I usually do this, but I'm going to start by kind of stating the obvious. Given the position on the national finances, and I don't know whether members have picked up that the national debt is now over £2 trillion, which is an increase of 330 billion this year alone. That coupled with rising demand and costs for our services, I think there's no doubt in my mind we're in for a very tough few years. And as ever, our position is always compounded by the fact we are the lowest funded county council in the country. The positive news is that we can set a balanced budget for next year.
Oh dear, you're freezing, Chris.
Given some of the kind of pressures, yeah. That is a real issue given some of the pressures that we're facing, and clearly you would have seen in the press that a number of local authorities are not in a position to set a balanced budget for the forthcoming year. And the reason we're not in that position is because we haven't come into this year with stored up financial problems. We've come into this year with sound finances. In terms of kind of looking a little bit further ahead, I think how tough it is going to be for the county council over the medium term will ultimately come down to central government choices about how the national public finance will be brought back into balance. Members will be aware that the austerity years since 2010, the balance of bringing the public finances back into balance were roughly around 80% kind of focused on spending cuts and 20% on tax increases. It doesn't feel like the balance is going to be also that way in terms of bringing the current position back into balance, and it does feel like borrowing will be taking the strain for maybe a little bit longer than the austerity years. But having said that, there's inevitably going to be pressure on public expenditure. And I think we're just going to have to wait over the next few years to see how much pressure there is going to be on our budget. I think the key theme for the budget is uncertainty. I mentioned uncertainty over funding. There's also uncertainty over costs. There's uncertainty over demand for services. There's a short-term uncertainty about how long we remain in lockdown, and how the pandemic is going to run over the next year. And I must admit, I could go on, and it is clearly the most uncertain budget we've ever had. Declan will go into the detail a bit more, but one of the key things we've tried to address that uncertainty with is by looking at the use of contingency within the budget. But it is clearly going to be, I think one thing that we can say for certain, that the budget that we're going to agree for the start of this year, the reality is going to be somewhat different. Whether it's going to be a lot worse or better, we'll have to wait and see. But it's an incredible uncertainty, both short term and medium term. That's all I was going to say by way of introduction. So shall I pass straight on to Declan?
Yes,
Chair?
yes, please, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. So in terms of we got given a timetable in terms of the sections breaking in between questions. So Chair, do you just want me to take you to the end of paragraph 16?
Yes, so that's basically revenue, is it?
No, that's just the first sort of introduction to the revenue, and then it'll kind of go into a bit more detail on sort of growth and savings and business rates. Or do you want me to keep going?
Okay. No, do it like that in bite-sized chunks. That'll help us. Thank you.
Okay. So I think Chris has pretty much covered off most of the points in that sort of first section, paragraphs 1 to 16. The only bit I was going to pick up was the changes to the revenue budget, which is paragraphs 8 through to 8 onwards, and most of these we did circulate after the spending review announcements. I think members are pretty much aware of all of these. There hasn't been a huge amount of change. Just a couple of points I wanted to bring out. One was the social care grant at 1.6 million. This was a bit of quite a disappointment. It just kind of, I suppose, shows the sort of government manipulation of formulas. When we, for the overall sort of size of national funding, when we sort of prorated that compared to what we received last year, we were expecting 2.7 million, but we actually only received 1.1 million, a drop of 1.6, and this is because they've taken into account the council tax increases. So although Byron's just announced only literally now that there's going to be an increase to 5%, the government had already assumed the 5% increase. So it was a bit of a kind of a Hobson's choice, really. So the government's already assuming you take it, but you can see how we've been quite badly hit by a tweak to the government funding formula that's more than half what we get, which isn't very helpful, to say the least. The other point I wanted to highlight was paragraph 12, the local council tax support grants, and this is government's recognition that the level of local council tax support is going to increase sort of significantly. And you'll see later on in the report we spend as a county about £30 million on this. So you can see it's kind of, although it sounds quite a big chunk, actually with the unemployment statistics that are out there, it's only a contribution rather than a sort of a solution to that lost tax income. So that's all I was going to say on that first section of the report, Chair, if there are any questions.
Okay, could you just explain in terms of the overall gap, the 93 million, you broke that down into 3 sections. Some of it we've got proposals of how to save that money, and others we haven't. But there's also a third section which seems to be about the high needs block, and yeah. You're assuming that that's going to be resolved, are you? That is not got to be found. Are the plans in place to resolve that?
So we on the high needs block, we assume that unless we solve it, the problem comes to us, because there's no. The Department of Education probably 12 months ago made some sort of grand statements that an overspend on high needs wasn't going to impact council services, but they've backtracked really heavily from that, and they're basically now saying it's with you, and they'll have a look at your recovery plan. So we do make that assumption that we're going to sort of solve the problems. The plans in place go a long way to resolving the problems, but it doesn't resolve it in its entirety. I think by the final year there's about sort of £5-6 million sort of left. So each year they're chipping away at the sort of that additional growth, and some additional funding has come in to help, but we don't assume that it's solved in its entirety just yet. So the department are still working with additional sort of plans on that.
So that would increase the amount, the gap, if you like, if government doesn't stump up the money to resolve that deficit.
No, we've assumed that we put the money aside. So that's so we basically have to put it into a reserve. So we're spending the cash on one hand, so we need to put the cash aside, as it were, on another hand. So if government came along with funding, we'd be able to release some resources back to the council.
I see. So you've made provision in the Mtfs for that money if we have to find it.
Yeah, we have. Yeah.
Okay, that's the point I think I was trying to understand. Okay, sorry, I should have. Byron has made a statement. He's welcome to come back, but I should have asked Nick, as in his role, whether there's anything you wanted to say, Nick, before we open this for debate in general terms.
Well, thank you, Chairman. So it is a very, very difficult time for us, especially as Conservatives, but to increase by 1.9 and take the whole 3% is a challenging thing to do. But I did speak to the group at length about it, and to be fair to the group, they all agreed that because of the situation that we're in, we have to recommend this to full council in due course. We've always been proud of our record in adult social care and children's social care. We've constantly put more money in there where we can, and sometimes at the expense of some of the things which are very, very dear to Conservative members. Now, on top of that, we've also got the problem this year, Chairman, as you know, of COVID. The government have been relatively generous with us, but we are still spending a lot more than we've received. We still remain the lowest funded county council in the country. There's only Maidstone and wherever it is, which is actually funded less than us. And then to cap all those commitments to adult social care, children's social care, COVID, and being the lowest funded, you've just heard about the risks, and we always talk about risks, but this year the risks and the uncertainties are even greater than certainly I've experienced in my 25 years on this county council and 8 of leading this county council. So it is with a heavy heart that we go for the full amount. But I think if we want to protect adults and children, which is absolutely essential in these COVID-ridden times, I think we've got to go for it. And we should be proud of our record, and we should seek to justify what we're doing on the basis that we have to do it. Otherwise, people and when I say people, I mean adults and children will suffer unnecessarily from trying to make small percentage savings. So nothing more to add to that, Chairman. Happy to just listen to what members say.
Okay, well, thank you for that statement. But I mean, are you concerned the increasing amount that as a council we're becoming dependent on council tax? Rather, 20 years ago it was made up fairly evenly, wasn't it, of grant from the government, business rates, other sorts of income, and council tax. Now, I mean, I think Blake put his finger on this at your cabinet meeting when he pointed out that the government was saying that we could increase council tax. We could increase our budget. Was it the spending power of the council was increasing significantly? But in actual fact, that's not cash. It's just permission to raise money on council tax. So as a council, and the uncertainty of business rates, or whether there'll even be businesses able to pay it after COVID that you've highlighted, we're just becoming more and more dependent, aren't we, on the council tax to keep going.
There is absolutely no doubt about that. Council tax is our biggest single income stream. Byron will be able to give you the numbers. So that is yet again another reason why we need to increase the council tax. And also, apart from the things we've mentioned, we have actually been very generous, in my view, with our expenditure throughout COVID in helping out small businesses. Even the last one wasn't a huge amount of money. That was to help out the so-called wet sector of the hospitality trade. But we should be proud of that, because other councils haven't stepped up and done that. We were the first council or the second council in the country to step up to the plate to provide free school meals. I mean, eventually Marcus Rashford persuaded the government that they should do it, so we were type of let off the hook. But we do things without fear or favour. We do things as an administration which we think benefit the people and the businesses of Leicestershire. And then again, another thing which we're very proud of and we're very keen to do is to lead a green recovery. I mean, it's something not something even you can agree with, it's something you would definitely agree with. Byron will tell you the actual numbers in percent, or Chris or Declan, about how reliant we are on council tax. I haven't got the figures to hand, but they will probably have them in their head, Simon.
Okay, thank you for that. So Byron, is there anything you want to add to what you've already said to amplify this?
Yes, I mean, the percentage is over 80% now of council tax as a proportion of our budget, which is shows just how dependent we are. That's not uncommon, by the way. There are a number of other councils that are in the same position. So it's become now certainly the dominant amount, especially for county councils, I have to say. Not quite the position for certain other categories. But so the pressure is there all the time. What the government, of course, have done over the years is they used to have a grant called the Rate Support Grant. And I think at one point it was nearly £100 million a year effectively for us, although it didn't have that particular label at that time. But that's now zero for Leicestershire. And the business rates element has remained reasonably constant around about the 58-60 million pounds a year figure. The other components of core spending power are things like the improved Better Care Fund and various other grants, but they're a much smaller portion of it. What I have to say is the support given through those measures, which is the part of the core spending power which is controlled by the government as opposed by the council tax, which they leave it up to us. They give much more support to inner London councils than they do to councils like Leicestershire. So, I mean, I can give you a figure. Camden Council, which is an interesting one, in the constituency of the Leader of the Opposition, they would receive per head of the population on core spending power £674 a head next year, compared with our 197. So we're talking about nearly £500 a year more for inner London councils per head compared with Leicestershire. It's grotesquely unfair, which is why we need fair funding.
Yeah, but that's been put on the back burner, hasn't it?
It has indeed, and it should not be.
Okay. How worried are you about this issue with the high needs block and this 30-odd million? Now, I dug out the letter you wrote on the 24th of September to Rishi Sunak, really setting out your concerns about the dedicated schools grant and the high needs block. That was kindly circulated, but we never saw a reply. Did you get one? Did it say anything?
Yes, we can give you the reply. The reply didn't come from Mr. Sunak. I wrote it to Mr. Sunak and also to Mr. Williamson, as you probably know. But we got a reply from Vicky Ford, who's an Undersecretary of State at the Department of Education. And that reply indicated that while she couldn't do anything about it, she's the minister responsible for SEND, by the way. She couldn't do anything about it in this coming year. She was looking at the position, and there may be a possibility of doing something about it in 22-23. And since then, we have this is Mrs. Taylor and myself, Mrs. Taylor being the lead member for Children's Services. We've been offered a meeting with Vicky Ford at some point. We haven't got a date for it yet, so we're anticipating that. And of course, we'll put our case for Leicestershire and for the wider local government sector on this matter to her.
Okay, so we are actively trying to address this because it's not getting any better, is it?
Indeed, we are. It's 26 million would be our accumulated deficit over the period of the plan. As you know, that's the component of the £92 million gap that we reported we would have when we first published the strategy. So it's a very significant amount, and there are three parts of it. One is the identified savings, which we've somehow got to put flesh around and make them happen. The second part is the council tax increase, which I've just announced. The third part is the SEND gap.
Thank you for that, Byron. I mean, what you're really saying is that this shouldn't be the responsibility of the local authority, that this needs to be funded by central government. This isn't about trying to reduce the expenditure. This is about where the money comes to fund this work. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, the government changed the position on education more progressively some years ago and took away the responsibility for determining the funding of schools, including special schools, away from local government, and put it into a special grant called the Direct School Grant. And one component of that is the high needs block, which is for SEND. And but I also put through legislation in 2014 to introduce these educational health and care plans to replace the old system for determining which child or which children need some special education measures. And the result of that, there are many more children now coming forward who are looking for a plan to have some degree of special education, and the bills have rocketed up, and that's why we've now got this prospect facing us of a £26 million deficit, because the government have not provided the additional funds into the high needs block that they should have done.
Okay, no, that's very helpful. I'm sorry to spend a bit of time on this, but I do think this is very significant and important, because even if we sorted out fair funding, if we don't sort this out, then we've still got a massive deficit that is currently falling on the council. So this is separate to fair funding.
You're right, we have to do both.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, shall we open the debate for any other comments or questions on this overall section of the report? I can't see any hands, but if you'd like to raise them now. None? Okay, right. Well, I'll ask Declan to continue then into the next section. What are you covering now, please, Declan?
It'll be paragraphs 17 to 43, which kind of covers sort of the corporate and central items of the budget, including council tax and business rate funding.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's quite a lot of detail in this, so I won't go through it all. I'll just pick out the main items. So pick off first of all on paragraph 20, the Mtfs risk contingency, and we've held it at this 8 million level for quite a few years. But what we've done in the past is usually the first year of the Mtfs release it down to reflect that sort of greater certainty of savings delivery. But with COVID sort of kicking around, which sort of there's only so much in truth people can do, we've held it in the first year this time round just to sort of reflect that greater sort of savings risk in this year. But it is the overall impact on the Mtfs is the same. We haven't increased the level. Where we have allowed for sort of all this sort of, I suppose, the specific impacts of COVID rather than the kind of the consequences like the knock-on to savings is paragraph 22, this COVID budget, and it really just reflects this sort of the dual uncertainty. We don't know what government interventions are going to go into 21 to 22, hence the knock-on impact in terms of cost or lost income on us, but also we don't know the level of government support. And that second one really is key. To give you a sort of a scale of the numbers, in the current financial year, government support is now approaching £100 million. That's kind of cash that sort of comes to the county council. Some of it to, sort of support additional costs. Some of it to, I suppose, to do things on government's bequest, things like the sort of test and trace sort of income. So that's £100 million in the current year. But to date, the only confirmed income we've had is just shy of £20 million. So it's a huge gap. Whilst we might all hope the impact of COVID next year is going to be lower, we don't know that at this stage. And it's worth bearing in mind as well, unemployment has only gone up by 1% so far due to the sort of the extension of the furlough scheme. It's going to go up much more next year, which will put greater impact on tax losses, but also a greater impact on services as well. So we've got this real sort of huge uncertainty. So we just need to kind of squirrel away what money we can in the short term. And some of this is actually, most of this COVID budget is that sort of that first instalment of the £20 million from the government. So whilst we hope things might be better, at the moment we're preparing for things not to be as good as this year, as it were, which is a pretty awful position to be in. The next section I wanted to pick up on was the contingency inflation living wage that starts on paragraph 26, and this has been a significant cost. It really got kind of turbocharged when the national living wage first got introduced, and obviously as that's been extended out to the middle of this decade, we expect those pressures to continue. As you guess with this, there's always a certain amount of guesswork goes on, so we do reset this contingency every year. So we never build up too much either of a problem we have underprovided or too much of a sort of a buffer if we've kind of overprovided. So we do reset it. But you'll see that on paragraph 27 it just breaks out the main components there, and it's with national living wage, the government commitment still at the £10.50. It's very hard to reduce that. The one that may kind of come down a bit is the pay awards. Obviously, there was the pay freeze announced this year, and for every year of pay freeze, it'd take about £3 million off that. But at the moment, we're assuming kind of 1 year of pay freeze and then 3 years back to roughly sort of inflation type increases with a bit of a national living wage kicker. The next section I wanted to pick up just sort of briefly was sort of paragraph 34. Although the numbers are quite small on the revenue funding for capital for this year, historically this is where we put a lot more money in there, which just reflects the demand on the capital programme. But obviously kind of as the COVID pressures and sort of establishing a COVID budget, that's where we've redirected all the sort of short-term resources that we are able to sort of scrape together. At the moment, the capital demand is sort of circa £40 million greater than the resources we've got. So there is that sort of fine balancing act. But this is how we've been able to kind of, I suppose, both balance the current financial year as in we're sitting in at the moment, but also the first year of the budget is by basically redeploying resources. Obviously, if we don't need the COVID budget, this is likely to be the sort of the first call on it, particularly as kind of members are well aware of things like infrastructure demands and some of the government programmes as well that we may want to exploit that sort of brings additional funding into the area. In terms of next one, I'm just going to pick up paragraph 36 is an important one because there's some quite big funding numbers in there, and it's just that the good news on this one is it's all confirmed, so that does take away a little bit of uncertainty from us. So all the main grants in there have been ticked off, as it were. And paragraph 37, the corporate growth and savings. First of all, just apologies, there is a typo in there. It says 6.8 million in 2021-22. That should actually be 22-23. So the approach we take each year is we assume that we know all the growth for the first financial year, the Mtfs, but the next 3 years is this contingency is basically our known unknowns. We know service demand is going to come along. We just don't know exactly what form. So the services submit what they do know about, and we use historic kind of trends to sort of just put an overlay on top to say there's going to be additional growth coming in there. And that's, to be honest, it hasn't been enough in the last few years. So, but it does allow you to avoid that sort of short-term shock of just not having enough at short term. So the next section, touched on a little bit with the council tax support grant, is paragraph 38 onwards, the council tax and business rate section. And it's been a sort of strange year for tax in 2021-22. Basically, business rates you'd expect to be very problematic, but actually government support has kind of directed to businesses sort of held this up that we've been compensated for. And council tax, we've been expecting to hit a cliff edge when basically COVID ended and sort of support requirements sort of go up massively or sort of bad debts increase. But it hasn't happened because furlough's been kicked out or extended out into next year. But paragraph 39 quite succinctly kind of, I suppose, illustrates our problem that when unemployment does crank up, and we're expecting it to go from 4% in the current year to 7% next year, so it's almost doubling. We spend as a sort of as a county area £15 million on working age adults, and basically people have to contribute about 15% of the council tax bill. The rest of it basically we take as a discount on the bill, and you can see it's very crude numbers, but you can sort of you can quite comfortably see how we could lose £8 million in sort of tax revenue next year just through council tax, and that's not including things like bad debts, not including business rates, etc. And I was going to pause there, Chair. That's sort of just a quick overview of paragraph 17 to 43. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Declan. I've got Kevin Felton first, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's actually paragraph 40 that I just want to comment about. Tax base. Rather different than the numbers, but my little parish council did our budget setting last week, And we were quite surprised to find that the tax base provided by Harbour District Council had actually gone down. Now it's obviously they work it out on the property, the Band D properties, and it may well be that we've had that's changed rather than more building. But nevertheless, we are so reliant on the 7 districts collecting the council tax for us. What sort of have you had any feedback at all from districts yet? I know they're still setting their budgets. Any districts about how they feel they're going to do with council tax collection this year? Because clearly that could have a huge effect on everything that you've just been talking about.
Yeah, can you explain, Declan, how that works in terms of if people don't pay, who is responsible for bridging that gap then in terms of the debt? Does it fall on all the authorities that precept to take their share of the loss, as it were?
Okay, yeah, I can pick those two up. So the first one, in terms of council tax performance, we have had some initial conversations with the districts, and it has been one of those. I touched on that sort of furlough kind of sort of scheme ending. So it's been very difficult for the districts to kind of judge what's going to be the implications, because at the moment the collections held up really well across most of the districts. We did see a drop earlier in the year because they weren't allowed to do sort of council tax enforcement, and they did move into kind of much more of a, I suppose, a softer letters, as it were, when they're chasing things up. So we did see a bit of a drop off in collection, but it did start to come back as sort of the enforcement was able to kind of gradually sort of ramp up again. But the big thing everybody was waiting for was what happens when unemployment goes up, and that hasn't happened yet. But I think you're right. We should expect to be that sort of to be a bit of a hit on the collection performance, but it's likely to be the council tax support schemes likely to be the bigger impact, because people still try to pay, but it'll be actually that discounting of the bill that's going to be the bigger impact. And it is going to be difficult for parish councils, because you can get clusters within sort of individual parishes, and it'll hit that parish sort of much worse than sort of the averaging out that we do benefit from. But I think it is going to be a bit of a watching kind of very much a watch and see what happens. We'll just have to kind of work it through. I mean, in terms of where it pays, in terms of sort of the shares question, it does just follow kind of our the usual kind of a collection. So the county council take basically 3/4 of any losses. So the districts will be responsible for kind of doing the enforcement and trying to sort of reclaim that money. But all those enforcement costs and the lost income do just get shared off amongst all the different council tax beneficiaries. So ourselves, the district councils, police, fires, and the parishes all take some pain.
Okay, it's helpful, I think, to understand that. And the fund you referred to then, that is the government putting money into that? Because it was previously the changes that it had to be decided and fixed by all the authorities, didn't it? So are you saying the government is now subsidising that fund?
Yeah, so you're right. They localised council tax support back in 2013, and it basically, at the time, they gave us sort of some money, but they've obviously taken it off us again with the cuts through austerity. So what we expect to happen is local council tax support is going to cost all sort of council tax beneficiaries, building authorities and presetters about £11 million next year. Government for the whole of the county of Leicestershire have provided about £5 million, so they're helping to offset about half of those losses.
And is that a one-off?
Yeah, that's one-off. Yeah, obviously unemployment's not going to sort of get fixed after next year, so all those future years we're going to have to sort of find the money for.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, thanks for that. Any other questions on this section before we move on to the next one? Okay, just on a general point, Declan, you announced, or the council announced some months ago, things like some measures to try and control spending, like freezing posts, only filling really important ones, and a number of other restrictions. Are they all still in place, and are they set to continue into this new financial year?
So at the moment they're still in place. I mean, it's quite you're right. It was all around that sort of trying to avoid sort of, I suppose, non-essential spending. That, can you delay things, or can you kind of just sort of do without for a period of time? And it's interesting because obviously with a lot of the activity that's going on, sort of focused on COVID, it kind of squeezes sort of spend down a little bit. So at the moment they're still in place, and we'll probably have to reassess that off the back of kind of where we are now with the Mtfs as things settle down. So we'll probably wait for the local government settlement to get finalised, which should happen sort of in the middle of next month, and then that'll give us kind of a clean starting point for next year, and we can have a sort of a discussion about whether that's the right time to lift those measures now.
And has that helped? I mean, do you have can you put a value on what that saved or meant that we didn't have to spend out?
We can have a look at it. I know on the last monitoring, sort of a couple of months back, it was low millions kind of thing, sort of couple of million, 2 million, 3 million, around about that sort of order of magnitude, which is mainly through kind of vacancy reduction, but some other bits and pieces as well. So it's one of those. It's never going to solve all your problems, but it just helps to buy you a bit of time.
Okay, thanks for that. Right, I haven't got any other hands raised. So how far do you want to go next on the next section? You're muted, Declan.
Apologies. So it'll be paragraphs 44 to 52. So this will cover off the earmarked funds and the robustness of estimates.
Thank you.
It's quite a short one. So we go down to paragraph 44, and we kind of, I suppose, it's a common inclusion. It's sort of a requirement of sort of Chris in his role as the sort of the director of finance to highlight the kind of the uncertainties in the budget. And this kind of the list this year has kind of been turbocharged a bit because we've always got our underlying problems. Some have been touched on about special education and needs, but we shouldn't forget social care as well. Children's social care has been a huge pressure for us, and adults as well is sort of significant spend, which you expect with this sort of such a big department. But so the list there in 45, like I say, it's been turbocharged a bit. There's in there, as you'd expect, is COVID and the uncertainty around that. We've also got the problem that sort of funding's only for 1 year. We're getting no indications at all what happens beyond next year. And if anything, it wouldn't be a surprise if things change during the year. There's going to be a budget on the sort of 3rd or the 5th of March, and then there's talk even already of a second budget in the year. So things could change next year. But also, and you'll notice down there at the I've lost the sight of it now. The final one down there, the final bullet point in paragraph 45 about the kind of a lot of the reviews that are going on, and there's sort of it's not just sort of fair funding that we talk about a lot, but both social cares, adults and children are getting looked at, SEND reforms as well, and kind of historically we've kind of looked to reviews to help us, but often they've sort of bitterness and they've kind of caused, been a focus on sort of additional quality, additional sort of service provision, and costs have gone up. So quite a nervy year next year, to be honest, with lots and lots of uncertainty, not just around COVID, but a lot of these reforms that have been kind of put on the back burner that should now come to fruition. Members may have picked up as well, they're not just talking about fair funding anymore. There's talk about a fundamental redesign of kind of property taxes, so scrapping stamp duty and council tax and bringing in a new property tax, which kind of, members will remember what it was like when sort of I don't know, when sort of poll tax was sort of obviously introduced, and it cost billions of pounds to kind of settle that down when council tax was brought in. There was a big injection of cash into the system, so it'll be interesting how they do square that circle. So as of moving through this sort of section, the next main paragraph we're going to touch on was paragraph 47, the general fund. It's a similar level of that sort of unearmarked kind of resources as we've had in previous years. We had included the SEND sort of money in there as well, but it was becoming sort of slightly confusing, particularly with sort of a lot of the DFE comments that was going around. So we've left general fund clean now, so it's just unallocated. And you'll notice down in the kind of the earmarked funds, there's a new fancily titled budget equalisation fund, and that's where we've put the SEND money, just to make sure we can balance that money in the short term. So it is just putting the cash aside because we've spent it on SEND, so we need to reserve it out of council resources. And in terms of paragraph 48, 49, in terms of the earmarked funds, apart from that budget equalisation, it's pretty much as you've seen before, with the predominant kind of earmarked fund being the capital financing, which just reflects that kind of try to save up before we sort of spend the money. But you will notice the balances overall are gradually sort of dropping down. It's kind of taken a while, but they are sort of gradually getting lower than they had been in the past. So that brings me to the end of that section, Chair. Happy to take questions.
Okay, it's interesting what you're saying about a new system. I've not picked that up before. Where's that talk coming from then, and how radical might it be?
I mean, it seems to be mainly kind of leaked out. I think it was covered in the Times, was the one who sort of primarily broke it, but that broke the news rather. But it's kind of, it does sound like it could be very radical. They're talking about a percentage of your property tax rather than sort of a percentage of your property value rather than sort of a council tax or stamp duty. So you can imagine that would sort of skew or move all the kind of all the funding to sort of the southeast rather than the kind of the north, as it were. So you can see why it kind of there's an appeal there. But apparently Sunak's asked for sort of an investigation into this, and Treasury are looking at it. So it could be very, very radical. But the problem with radical means it often just gets delayed for more uncertainty. But a bit of a wait and see.
And that would still be collected by local authorities, we assume.
I presume so, yeah, because I think they'd expect the sort of the tax collection to be local. Similar to, I suppose, it'd become very similar to business rates. It'd be kind of almost a residential business rate.
Right. Okay, so it's not, that would have nothing to do with people, the number of people that lived in the property. So even with council tax, you get a discount, don't you, if one person occupies it?
Yeah, we do that sort of single person discount. No, but you're right. If you sort of, it's fascinating because you can kind of, we give a single person discount on the basis that kind of you consume less services. But if it does move to a pure property tax, would they still put discount exemptions in the same way, or would they just kind of say, well, if you can afford to live in that house, you know, it's up to you. But it'd be fascinating when it comes out. But you know, is it fraught with sort of difficulties, I'd suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, very interesting. Okay, we better keep an eye on that. Thank you. Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair. Going back to paragraph 45, you've got a comment there that in common with the County Council, the clinical commissioning groups are struggling to produce a balanced budget. Could you explain a bit more about what their difficulties are and how that might impact on us?
I think that their difficulties in some ways is primarily sort of system driven, where we kind of do our 4-year budgets. They are very much kind of, you know, hand to mouth on one hand, and that they only do sort of 1 year kind of budgets. I think they do sort of creep into 2 occasions, but it tends to be very much a focused 1 year budget. And they tend to be much more about balancing that year. Concept of reserves and stuff isn't sort of as prevalent for them. So it's kind of, it's much harder for them to sort of balance their budgets. But in terms of that sort of system financing side of things, but also because obviously they don't have a lot of control over kind of the demand coming through the door. At least with social care, you can put some sort of eligibility into criteria, but NHS obviously, as members are well aware, it's kind of free at the sort of the point of access. So they struggle much more to control those spend, particularly that sort of commissioner provider split. So it's that sort of thing, and it's been around for a few years ago. A few years now, their problem. Now how that impacts us, there's probably 2 main areas. One is the sort of the Better Care Fund, and we, off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how much it is, but it's sort of in excess of sort of £30 million, split really into 2. Some is just a direct kind of contribution towards social care services, and some is, you know, of sort of different services that they commission from us that sort of agreed as sort of joint priorities. So if that funding was to come under pressure, obviously that's sort of a direct knock on to sort of the county council's kind of finances. Now there is some protection around that in that the government sets a national framework, but there is quite a big element of local discretion. The other side of things, and what we've seen through COVID, is the NHS were very keen, you can obviously understand why, to get sort of improve hospital discharges, and that's been really expensive because obviously the ideal setting hasn't always been available for people, so they've been ended going up into sort of either additional care to what you'd normally do in a sort of the home setting, or use of residential homes, which are more expensive than a home setting. And that's in the current financial year, I think it's around about £15 million that the CCGs have given the county council to accelerate those kind of hospital discharges. Obviously, kind of if the NHS keeps its desire of having kind of that quicker discharges, but the funding isn't available at the same level, obviously that's a direct impact on us. So there's sort of some of the examples. But I mean, the NHS is always better off, and it's much more loved than local government. So they do tend to be at the front of the queue for funding. But there's a few examples of how it does impact ours, and the finances are intertwined.
Thank you.
Terry, did you want to come back?
No, that was helpful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. David Bill.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I suppose this must be about the, I don't know, 40, getting on for 40 years I've been through this exercise with you all. I mean, and every year it seems to get worse than the year before. Could I first of all say that I think we've been excellently well served with our financial officers. They really are doing their best in the most difficult circumstances. But could I just make the general point that I think we were in trouble long before COVID hit us. COVID has just exacerbated everything that we're facing. But I think the County Council has been heading for financial problems for some years, as we all know, and we've tried everything, fair funding. We've put forward plans. All kinds of ideas have been suggested that we've all supported, but they never quite come to fruition because they're always blocked further up the line. I think what is significant about this morning's meeting is the report that we're going to be looking at right at the end, which talks about the impact of the current situation on the economy as a whole, and the potential impact on unemployment, which this report says is expected to go up from 4% to 7%. But what we don't really know is just how robust the local economy is going to be to get us out of this situation. We really don't know where we are with manufacturing or the logistics industries, which is what we're depending upon very heavily to provide the wherewithal to keep the economy going and keep local services going. And it's all very quiet at the moment because of COVID, but I think there's some underlying problems where our relationships with the world and with Europe are very unclear. And I think we really do face so many difficulties that we've got to somehow pull together and find our way through this lot. But I don't think it's ever been as bad as it is at the moment. I'm sorry to have to say that, Chairman, but I think there's problems ahead for us all.
I think you're on mute, Chair.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, I was saying thank you for those comments, David. I don't think you're looking for a response on that. I think that's a bit of a statement as the current situation, which is quite depressing from that point of view. Tom Barclay.
Thank you, Chair. Just a comment, really, rather than a question. I mean, undoubtedly, we face challenges which are unique because of the global pandemic and the pressures put on the County Council. But I think the budget we have before us today shows the level of thought that's gone into it and the contingencies we're making. And there's undoubtedly huge uncertainties. We're not getting the final settlement confirmed till next month. We're producing a budget which takes into account various factors. We know that we're going to raise 9.6 million for adult social care by increasing that budget, but the increasing council tax was also the dangers of the Better Care Fund funding reducing by that amount. And as far as I can read from within this budget, we have done everything we possibly can to help ourselves continue services and provide assistance throughout the pandemic, both to residents and businesses. I think it's quite admirable, and I think the level of thought that's gone into it is impressive. And I know more than anyone else here can tell what the future holds, but I think this sets us up to deal with the future, as far as we know at the moment, as best you possibly could. And, I thank the finance officer for doing that. It's impressive.
Thank you for that contribution, Tom. Before we move on to look at the capital programme, has anybody else got any issues on the overall situation in terms of revenue? Okay. Just in terms of going forward then, Declan, and the amount that is not yet identified, I know that there's various references in the report to looking at certain areas, but can you say a bit more about the plan going forward to identify this shortfall, which is not yet identified in terms of service areas? I mean, obviously we've brought these consultants in that looked at adult social care quite carefully and have come up with a number of savings, and now as I understand it, they're looking at children's services. And I even saw a reference in one of the scrutiny papers that they are, or they're going to do something in E&T. I think that might be on transport. So what else are we looking at to bridge the gap?
We've been appended, and I don't think it's appended to this report. Let me just check. To the main cabinet report, there was it was Appendix D to the main cabinet report, where it was basically the savings and the development. So it's not attached to this one. So included in each of the sort of scrutiny papers was sort of a small section that did just sort of outline some of the initiatives that have been looked at. So to be honest, it's almost going back. You remember sort of a couple of years ago, we used to do a similar thing where kind of we'd trail over the kind of the autumn things that people have started to work on, but they're not yet in a sort of a well advanced enough state to be included in the Mtfs. So we're just following that sort of approach that we used to do, where people have sort of collated their ideas, we sort of highlight them sort of transparency, and then over the course of the next year they'll get worked through. And as you can imagine, we always say this, the work that sort of consultants in Europe came in and did with adults was sort of hugely beneficial, because it felt like we were kind of getting to that stage with adults where there wasn't much more to come out. Obviously, that's given us a lot of confidence that there is a way of kind of changing the service without a sort of a detrimental impact on the sort of service users, but at the same time releasing some cash. So obviously that's kind of the appeal of them going into children's was a big one. And as you say, as part of that deal of them going into children, there was a request for them to identify some of the other areas, and not to necessarily go in and sort of create another sort of identical scheme to adults and children, which are big programs of work, but to almost, I suppose, get us started and oversee kind of internal resource to look at it. And you're exactly right. One of those proposals is with the transport side of things, which is primarily around the sort of social care and SEND parts of the world. So it's got a nice link with some of the problems that we've talked about, but also a link with where these consultants' core competencies are. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is sort of not overusing consultants in a general sense, but trying to keep them focused on the stuff that they've proven in the past that they can do well. So there's a mixture in the programme with utilising the transformation unit to support Newton Europe, but also to work with areas that sort of not covered by that work, to sort of look for sort of cost savings. And like I say, if you look at Appendix D to the cabinet report, those initial ideas are listed out there.
Okay, no, that's helpful to have that on explained. Nick, did you want to make a comment on this particular issue of where we're going next?
Yeah, basically, you can just see how difficult it is for us. We try to run a 4-year Mtfs, but unfortunately the government only likes to run a 1-year Mtfs. So all we've got certainty on is 1 year. So this just exacerbates the risks and uncertainties going forward. That's not to say that we shouldn't have a 4-year Mtfs. We most certainly should, but I wish the government would have a 4-year Mtfs, because it would dovetail nicely with our 4-year Mtfs. And when it comes to looking at efficiencies, Simon, we've actually got to look at everywhere all the time. Now, we can't afford to look at everywhere all the time, but you just mentioned the transport budget in the E&T. We have got to look at everything. If we can't find efficiencies, Simon, even though we are willing and difficultly willing to put up council tax, if we don't find efficiencies, even with us putting up council tax to the max, which is politically difficult, it will necessitate cuts. So the problems are 4-year Mtfs with a 1-year government Mtfs, and the constant need to find efficiencies. to protect the services, because there is still growth in services, as you can see. Nothing more to add to that, Simon.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I think the problem is that we've had 10 years of cuts, and there isn't much left to cut, is there? There's not much that we do now that isn't statutory. And I know you can always look at how statutory is delivered and try and make the kind of efficiencies that you've mentioned. But, what else could, what would we do? Close all the libraries bar one, close waste sites. Those are the sorts of things you have to go to now. There is really nothing kind of, well, we could cut here. There's not much left in that area that's not statutory.
You're absolutely right, Simon. I mean, obviously, they'd be the last things I want to go to, libraries and household waste recycling sites. But when you're down to the bare bones, even with increasing council tax, and we've not been frightened to increase council tax, we are in a difficult situation. So we're doing our best, Simon. But as you point out, there'll still be tough decisions to make. This 2% plus 3% doesn't make us a wealthy council. It just puts off the evil day in some areas for a while. It just is tough. And as you say, Simon, the entire time I've been leader, it's been tough. Nobody's ever come to me and said, oh, we've got an extra 5 million. What would you like to do with it? All I've ever been said is, we're 5 million short. How would you like to save it?
No, the days of growth, new spending is long gone, hasn't it? Yeah. Okay. Byron, was there anything you wanted to add to that comment? I particularly found that, was it bare bones is pretty much where we are now.
Yes, and I agree with all that's been said on that. If you take it over the years since we began the cost reduction programs back in the from about 2010 we began, but started to really push it very hard from 2012 onwards. We've made 223 million pounds of savings up to now, which means that the budget would have been another 223 million to deliver what we're delivering at the moment had we not been able to put through those measures. And of course, we've got programmed in a lot more in these proposals, as you know. Other councils have not come under the same pressure. I keep making this point. And it's been ignored by government, although actually the principle was accepted by previous ministers, not least of which by the present Chancellor. But the great sadness to me, and I will keep pressing this, is that they have not acted. And of course, you've got this grotesque unfairness between some of the councils, certain categories of councils, compared with us. And of course, we reinforced in the view that we take on this by the surveys and work done by the consultancy organisation Empower, who for 3 years have rated us the most productive council in the country. They didn't publish the data, by the way, for last year. We're still waiting for the 2020 data to see if we maintained our position. But I'm confident from the performance report, which you saw in the autumn, that we probably have. So I believe actually our officers and all our teams have done remarkably well to hold the situation. But we're now beginning to run out of options, as previous speakers have said.
Okay, thank you for that. Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to put a slightly positive spin on things. I mean, taking it from the adults community's point of view, the target operating model has been a clear success. And I think has provided better services and more cost efficient. You mentioned Simon, and I only came in because I think Declan obviously just mentioned a couple, but within the adults communities, we're now looking at the implementation of digital assistive technology, which again is hoped to give us some a savings benefit plus better services of up to 2 million. So I just think we should applaud the innovation which is going on throughout the county council. So we are looking to avoid cutting services at all costs by doing them in a different way, and quite frequently we're doing them. And I would echo Byron's point that if other councils were to take up some of the practices of Leicestershire County Council, there would be plenty of money to redistribute from the totally inefficient inner city councils that we see, that would give funding across the country in a proper way.
Right, Terry, I will take that as a statement. You don't need a reply on that. Robust comments. Unfairness of the present system. Yes, acknowledged. Right, so we're now going to move on to look at capital, and I do think capital is particularly, it's always important, it's even more so important going forward because of the demands on capital and the programme that we're looking at. So Declan, would you like to introduce this section, please?
Okay, yep, thank you, Chair. So this is paragraphs 53 through to 78 covers the capital, and similar to the last ones, I won't go through the sort of departmental detail, just pick up a sort of a handful of the key issues. So the first issue is going to sort of, I suppose, our first point I was going to make was sort of paragraph 53 just sets out the kind of, I suppose, the approach to setting the programme, which is kind of, you know, it's very motherhood and apple pie, what you'd expect, and it hasn't changed from what we've done before. But what has changed is that demand for capital has stayed very high. You know, when I first sort of started with the council, you'd sort of I don't know, the capital programme was maybe sort of 70-80 million pounds at its peak, and now we're averaging over the 4-year programme 112 million pounds, with much more in those early years. So the kind of, even though the criteria hasn't changed much, the demand going through the council has increased markedly. And the first issue I did sort of want to pick up, and this is one of the causes of the demand increasing, is this concept of forward funding. So rather than just sort of leaving sort of the money to come in from the developers, by taking sort of the hope is by taking a coordinated approach, you can get the costs down overall, and you end up with better infrastructure. The council actually sort of intervenes and sort of puts money in advance and builds some of that with the promise of money coming back in later. So we are very dependent on this, of both the sort of developers sort of going through with their sort of monies and the district council being able to put the arrangements in place to enable that to happen. We're very much a third party on this, but you know, like I say, the hope is a coordinated approach is better for everybody overall, making that risk worthwhile. The next point, sort of skipping through quite a few paragraphs, is down to paragraph sort of 74, the funding from internal balance, and this again is driven by the sort of the capital programme has kind of increased at a rate that's beyond that kind of our means to sort of do it through sort of conventional sort of funding purposes. So what we're doing is basically, where we hold a cash balance, it's for a specific purpose, but until that specific purpose comes around, we'll sort of we'll use it for capital, sort of, you know, that sort of internal kind of sort of taking it from sort of one place to use another. And it's kind of the sense in this is it's much cheaper than going out to sort of external borrowing. There's sort of zero interest costs at the moment, although you would expect those to come back, and you can time it as well a bit more sort of fluidly, rather than having to sort of commit to sort of a bundle of debt, as it were. So, but it is dependent on, you know, that cash balance being or that cash management being very, very good. And there is a limit to what you can do with this as well. It's not a panacea. So obviously you can only internal borrow depending on how much cash you've got, and leave a sort of a reasonable buffer in there as well for the unexpected. And you do need to require repayment as well. Like I say, it's not a panacea. So the level that we're doing at the moment is going to cost £6.5 million per annum by 2024-25. So it's one to be used sparingly, but obviously sort of priorities dictate, as it were. So that's all I was going to touch on, Chair, in terms of the capital programme. The rest of it is pretty much sort of departmental level detail.
Yeah. So just to clarify then on the capital, what if you do that initially from revenue? The assumption is that you replace it later. Is it that you're not just funding it and then that's the end of it from revenue? You're assuming it's going to come back in from another means. Am I understanding that correctly?
At the moment, we've assumed that we've taken the kind of the prudent assumption that some of these is, you're right, on things like the forward funding, the money should come back in and pay off those balances, but that's going to be after the period of the Mtfs. So what we've done at the moment is just assume that we have to repay it through the sort of it's called a minimum revenue provision, the MRP. That we just assume that chips away at the balance each year, like you would sort of like you pay off your sort of mortgage. So we've taken that kind of, you know, we're going to pay it off bit by bit approach, just because there's uncertainty out there, and not all of this kind of use of internal balances does relate to forward funding. So there's a fair chunk. It is just trying to we have just got to spread it over a period of time.
Okay, Dr. Reiner.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions. One was a more general point. I think you've covered this, but I could do with explaining. As I understood it, we were using some of our capital forward funding ability to survive COVID-19 previously. And am I being reassured now that that's not necessary? And if so, why? And then the next one relates to paragraph 57. If we forward fund roads and schools, is there not a risk that when the developer does turn up with their planning application, they'll be able to say, oh, well, you've got capacity within your schools and roads, and therefore I don't need to make a contribution?
Good point.
So in terms of the... Sorry.
Just Declan, I can pick up the second question.
Okay, so in terms of the first one, Dr. Ryan, you're exactly right. The position's changed. So before the summer, we were facing sort of I think it was about a £35 million gap in terms of our funding, and the way we came back in the autumn to say we're going to sort of close that is take out about sort of £20 million from capital. Now, fortunately, kind of the position hasn't been as bad as sort of we thought at that period of time. There's been an awful lot of additional sort of government funding coming in there. We did things like the spend controls that referred to earlier, which had a sort of a small beneficial impact, and some of the things like the council tax sort of drop off hasn't been nearly as bad as we thought because the furlough scheme got impacted. So there's so you're exactly right. The kind of where we thought we were going to have to sort of take from capital to fund COVID, those pressures have eased off, an awful lot. So that's on an even keel now. We haven't had to rob Peter to pay Paul, as it were. And I'll pass to Chris for the second one.
It's a very good point, actually, when we've had those discussions at officer level kind of internally. So it is something we're looking at. I think we're probably going to end up going for council's opinion. We're pretty certain we're going to be okay, because if you forward fund something and you financed it through borrowing or debt of some sort, clearly you haven't financed it. But we are going to get legal opinion just to make sure that we are kind of fully okay on that point. But yeah, it is a good point.
But presumably this would be about when the scheme has been identified and it's been justified. This isn't ahead of anything in the planning process. This would presumably be to forward fund a scheme which had been agreed during the planning process and was in the legal agreement, but it was a matter of timing as to when it was going to come forward. Is that not the case, Chris?
Well, it should be the case, and we're pretty comfortable that the risk is going to be okay. But what we're worried about is that you get to the position where, say, the road is built or the school is built, and a developer says to you, well, hold on a second, you've already built the road, so why do we need to give you the money? So that, because these developments can take, 10, 20 years before they're fully kind of built out. And that's the risk we're trying to mitigate. We kind of think we are going to be comfortable with it, but over a long period of time, the road could have been built for 10 years and we could still be relying on 106 contributions to come in and finance it.
But presumably our argument would be, well, you've signed a section 106 agreement, which says this is justified, necessary, passes the SIL test, and now you've built so many houses, it's time to pay up.
You're right, but there might be some instances where actually we haven't signed the 106 when we're forward funding it. Say it's a big housing development, lots of different plots of land, and some bits there isn't a signed 106, but the viability assessment says the money will be coming in from houses on that element of site. So it depends on how much uncertainty you take when you're actually forward funding some of these things. And with roads, clearly you can be taking a bit more uncertainty with some of the other developments.
Okay, right. You've explained that in full. And you're saying that we might get legal advice on that.
I think we are going to get legal advice just to check we are kind of, the risks are low.
Okay. Nick, did you want to add on this point?
Sure. Terry has a very, very, very valid point there. And I have made it to ministers that the risks to the upper tier authorities in two-tier areas, albeit, obviously City Mayor never has the same problem. The risk to the upper tier authorities where we have the expense and the lower tier has the planning powers are very, very difficult. And that has also, that has contributed I think over the last 18 months, the problems we've had, say, with funding the Melton Mowbray roads and schools and things like that, they are very, very real risks on Section 106. You've got risks on developers then saying, oh, it's not sustainable, we can't pay that amount. And then, of course, you've got the even bigger risk without a supplementary planning agreement is the risks of a wayward planning committee suddenly deciding that they say would want more social housing and no school, you know, and it's the other way around. Social housing actually require more schools or more social care. So they are very, very real risks, and it's pleasing. I mean, I'm not saying Terry doesn't understand, but it's really good when members do understand the risks that upper tier authorities face with significant sums of money, relying on it coming back in future years. So it's good to talk about it.
Okay, no, that's helpful. Byron, are you on this same point?
Yes, I just wanted to add a couple of points. I mean, we have, in the case of Melton, we believe, not fully completed and agreed yet, but found a way of dealing with the road issue through a clause in the 1980 Highways Act and 278 agreement. So we do direct deal with the developer. But when it comes to the schools, there is indeed that possibility that the planning committee could, at a future point in time, change their minds, as it were, especially on application by a developer. But more to the point, even if they don't and act responsibly, which of course we would hope that they would, the developer then still has the option of appealing. And at that point, it brings in a planning inspector who could well uphold the appeal and take away our money. And that's another point that we've made to the MHCLG in recent times. There's a lot of threat to the county council's finances from taking this approach.
Yeah, okay. No, I think I wanted to cover this because I want to talk about paragraphs 49 to 61, which is very much related, and what was said at the last cabinet meeting on how the Melton situation might be expanded to cover other infrastructure. But I had got John Sinnott, the chief executive, had indicated he'd like to come in on this.
Thank you, Simon. As Chris has said, there's a lot of internal officer discussion about this, and I know Anthony's on the call. It might be helpful if he just spends a couple of minutes summarising his thoughts on the legal position.
Okay, thanks for that. Anthony, are you with us? Hello, come in, Anthony. I can see your face, Anthony. You are on the call. Anthony Cross. Okay, well, let's carry on, and then maybe Anthony will come back to us, because I think this is really important. So paragraph 59 to 61 is talking about forward funding, the reliance on developer funding, which both Nick and Byron have referred to, and then the need to have the support of the district councils going forward in some kind of sharing risk, and that the current approach is unsustainable. Now, if I'd understood it correctly, at the cabinet report, in one of the supplementary papers, there was talk of an additional paper or additional report that would set a policy context in this, and then that would, I think, go to full council, either as part of the Mtfs or separate to it. So can you just amplify on that in terms of how that is going to be taken forward, and is it there at the moment, or is that being delayed and it's coming forward at a later date? And then specifically, you've obviously now identified a possible another route which is outside of the Section 106 by the Highways Act. Can you say a bit more about that, please? Who wants to? Chris, can you comment on that?
I don't think Chris is probably the correct person.
Okay.
I mean, obviously,
I can.
Let the chief have a go first, Simon, and then I'll say one or two things if need be.
Okay.
To answer your question about timing, Simon, this won't be part of a separate report or request for a decision through the Mtfs. It will follow on later because there's a need to consult further with the districts. The highways option that Byron referred to, section 278, etc., will not necessarily apply in every case with every district because each of these schemes is different, some more complex than others. So that's one of the reasons why we do need a bit more time to get this right. But I think the importance of today and of the Mtfs report is flagging it, as I think members recognise as one really big issue which needs resolve.
Okay, and so this would be one policy for the whole county, but we might need different agreements with different authorities. So I can see, without going into too much detail, that the infrastructure requirements in one district could be significantly different than in another. So where you've got a lot of growth taking place, that would be different from an area that is forecast to have little growth.
I think, Simon, to be perfectly honest, all areas of the county, probably with the exception of Oby Wigston, which is pretty much built up, but all areas with the numbers that are projected, the growth is going to be significant, and we do need to try and develop a policy with district colleagues that ensures that we get the section 106 stuff in, because I think we can all agree, Simon, we don't want to build acres and acres of houses. We want to be building communities, and communities rely on section 106 contributions, both hard and soft. You know, it's not just all about roads and schools. There are other things when you live in a house, like we all do, that we expect to be provided. Sometimes you'll have to pay for it, sometimes you won't, but we want to build communities. We're perfectly willing to accept growth, but we want facilities and communities, not acres of bloody houses off spine roads.
Well, yeah, we absolutely all agree with that.
It's difficult. It will be challenging, and it will need significant work with district colleagues because they have the planning powers, we have the expense.
Right. The only comment I would make to you've referred particularly to wayward planning committees on something as significant as this. It's fairly unlikely that they would go off down an opposite route without a recommendation from the planning officer.
Some of them, Simon, I don't want. There are some wayward planning committees. There are some wayward members. I'm just saying in general. Some members of planning committees are more keen on social housing. You know, they've got a valid argument than they are on providing the other facilities. And if you've got a plot of land, it's only the land that can stand the cost. You know, the building of a social house is the same price as the building of a ordinary house. And if you burden the developer with too much social, sometimes he can't afford to build the other things. It is a difficult balance. It is a balance. So we have to be careful with it.
All
so
I'm
supplementary
saying
planning document to help. I
think you've got to get the planning officers, the senior planning officers on board as well as the planning committees, because often members will be given very, very clear advice, and if you don't do this, there'll be costs against you, which worries members increasingly.
That is why we need to agree things with district colleagues and district leaders. You know, the MAG group will be crucial to this. I mean, some senior members of districts are actually on record of saying they will prioritise social housing over all other section 106 commitments. Now, you can't do it. You know, we've all got to work together to get the developers to pay for these sort of things, because there's nowhere else where we can go to get the money for these sort of things. We're perfectly willing to forward fund, but as Terry pointed out, there are significant risks if we haven't done a deal with district colleagues on getting the money back in, and not from them, ensuring that they get it back in from the developers. And we're talking of big developments, you know. I mean, the biggest one coming down the tracks will be Charnwood. You know, it's a double-sized district, so the numbers are already double. Plus the fact it's a place where people want to live.
No, very helpful. I think we have an important debate here going forward on this capital issue. Now, Johnson's still got your hand up. Is there anything you wanted to add, John? And then I'll see if Anthony's back.
Just one thing in regard to planning at district council level, Simon. And that is, I think, one of the lessons we're learning from Melton, as Melton themselves are learning, is that you do need in the district to have adequate planning capacity and experience for this scale of development.
Absolutely strategic. Yeah. Okay. Now, I don't know whether you're back, Anthony, as our legal advisor, but you probably picked up, if you have, the debate we've been having, and if you're able to make an input on the legal aspects of this. Are you with us? Is Lauren Haslam with us, please? No. Okay. Okay. Well, let's press on. We've got some other members who'd like to comment. I've got Mr. Bolter next.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, regarding the forward funding, on large sites, more than one developer very often takes part in the development. If the housing market was to collapse and one of those builders was to go into liquidation, what happens then? Does the cost have to fall on the other developers to fund the shortfall, or do we miss out altogether?
Okay, who's able to answer that one?
I can have a go at that one if you want, like, Chair.
Thank you, Chris.
What we usually try and do is get the obligation to stay with the land. So even if a developer goes into liquidation, wherever the land ends up with another developer, they still have the obligation. So that's how we try and de-risk it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bill.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. On this issue, we've talked about wayward planning members and so on. I think the problem we face is slightly different to that which has been portrayed. I know the issue that has been portrayed is an essential one, and there's got to be sensible talks between county and districts. But the overall situation is that with the government's aim to build 300,000 houses a year, this is putting an excessive amount of strain on planning departments, planning members and local communities, and our ability to resist development is totally undermined by the fact that we have to point out we have a 5-year land supply, but developers are not taking up planning options or agreements to build, and are simply putting more pressure on districts to agree to further planning consents. And the element in this which needs to be taken into account is the role of the planning inspectorate, because the planning inspectorate now seems to be coming down heavily in favour of developers and the government's ambition to build this 300,000 houses. So the problems that planning members have is not really with the county at all, but with the situation that we all find ourselves in, with developers able to bring in teams of barristers insisting on 5-day long inquiries, stretching limited resources to the limit, and effectively forcing decisions to be made because of the firepower that they're able to bring to bear to the situation. So those of us who are on planning committees or who oversee the planning situation, we're aware of this forward funding issue, of course, but there's far more pressures on us than are referred to here. There has to be a reform of the planning inspectorate system if we're going to get back to some form of local accountability. Okay, thank you, David. I think we need to come back to this, and as has been confirmed, there is the prospect of having a policy that would be agreed. So that is something I think we would want to look at as the Scrutiny Commission at the appropriate time, and I understand there would need to be consultation on that, so we could presumably look at it during the consultation.
I think that we're straying slightly from the capital programme on the budget, but nevertheless, the two are inextricably linked. So what I'm going to do now is just check if either of our legal advisors are on the call. Otherwise, as I say, this is something we can come back to. So, Anthony Cross, are you with us?
Chairman, can I intervene?
Yep.
It's Lauren Haslam. Good morning.
Hi, Lauren. Yeah.
I just telephoned Anthony and send apologies on his behalf. He can hear and see everything, but unfortunately his sound is problematic and he's not able to make himself heard. So we'll try our best to sort that out. He's just asked me simply to confirm, though, as outlined by Chris in his presentation, we're acutely aware of the risks in relation to forward funding as our members and as you've been discussing this morning, and the plan is as described to take some specialist advice in relation to that area. I don't think there's anything I can personally add to that, as I'm probably not as closely involved in it as Anthony is, but just to reassure you that that is something that is in hand, and as I say, apologies for the connection issue that he's experiencing.
No, that's fine, and that's inevitable when we've got such a large meeting that somebody's going to have problems. But hopefully you picked up my comment that this is something that we could come back to, and I think when you've got that advice, and if there's going to be wider consultation with the planning authorities, and presumably the developers will want to have their say on it, then that's something we could look at as part of formulating a policy going forward, but it might be a little while yet.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Reflect that back to Anthony. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Yeah. So, is there anything else on the capital programme? Any other aspects of the capital programme members want to comment on? Mr. Bolter.
Yeah, I noticed that I forget the page it's on now, but I think it's regarding DFGs. That's the money the government allocates to the county, then transports immediately to districts and boroughs, yet it forms part of the capital programme. Now, I can't see how it can happen, because if it's passported straight away, the county doesn't keep out of it. Why is it included in the county's capital programme? So I think the answer to that, actually.
I think the answer to that is we'll ask Declan that if it comes into the council, then it has to be accounted for somewhere.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to comment?
It's basically that. Those are the rules, as it were. That
even if it's coming in one door and going out the other, we have to account for it.
It is, yeah. It's daft, but yeah.
All right, Bill.
That's fine, just to make sure it's not being retained by the county.
Okay. Right. Anybody else on capital? No. Right. So, pull this together then. Does anybody want to sum up? I mean, I think we have summed up in terms of the gravity of the situation, the unknowns, the fact that it is only a 1-year settlement, the huge gap that has got to be found, but we have discussed ongoing work to look at that and where that's brought benefits so far in adult social care. We hope that it will do similar work in other key departments that we've spoken about, but none of this takes away the need for a fairer funding settlement for the council, and we've even heard that there could be something more radical than that, although I suspect that would be some time off, and we would still need fair funding to address our immediate concerns. And we've also heard this morning that it is proposed to go as high as possible, legally possible, without a referendum on council tax, and that will be put to the cabinet and then on to the county council when the budget is finally set and agreed. We've also talked extensively about the capital programme, very large capital programme, and how that's going to be funded and the risks involved in that going forward. So I don't know whether Byron or Nick, on the overall situation, you want to add anything. I think it's been a helpful debate, which has gone on for over an hour and a half. But as I say, give the last word to either of you two.
I'll say just a summary, then leave it to Byron for the final word. Well, I think it's been very, very meaningful debate, Simon. We've had some really good contributions, and I think it helps now going forward that members understand the the problems we've got, you know, not only now but going forward, and hopefully explains why the administration are willing to, and it's not been an easy swallow for us, Simon, in the present situation to go for the 5%, but at least you can understand now why we've had to go for it and why I'll certainly be recommending it to Cabinet, and if Cabinet agree, recommending it to full council. But I'll let Byron say the last words on pure money.
Okay, Byron.
I won't say any more, but I will agree that this has been a very, very good meeting, and thank you for allowing all that discussion. And I think it's aired all the problems, and members of the public who are watching this and well-informed people will have taken away a great deal. No doubt we shall have some interesting correspondence which will follow.
Okay, thank you very much. I know the script says we'd be onto the Chief Exec's department by 10:30, which I all thought was a bit optimistic. But this is important. It's about the future of the council and how we provide services. So all those comments will now form part of the minutes that will go forward to the Cabinet with our comments. And so if nobody's got any other comments, I will move on to the next section, which is item 9 on the Chief Executive's budget. Who would like to kick off on that one, please?
Yes, good morning again. It's Lauren Haslam. I'm going to lead off on this, Chairman, if that's okay. Just following the structure of the presentations this morning, I'll start then with the first section, paragraphs 1 to 14, just simply by way of introduction. The report encapsulates the work that we've undertaken in our department with assistance and helpful advice from our finance business partner and colleagues in corporate resources over the last several months, looking at our budget. We set out a little bit of the detail of the services that our department provides at paragraphs 5 and 6 of the report. As you'll see, it's a diverse range of services, and it's difficult to encapsulate it, the entirety of it, in just a couple of paragraphs, but I hope you'll see from that the flavour of what we undertake in our department. Paragraph 7 then sets out our revenue budget. And the detail of that you'll see at table 2 and in the appendix A. I don't have anything else I wanted to say by way of introduction, so shall I move on to the growth section then at paragraph 15?
Yes, please.
So the first two items that we've put down on there are at paragraph 16, G18, business intelligence. This relates to support for two particular departments, children and family service and environment and transport. So this is Tom Pennell's area of work, and as we've heard this morning already, there's a significant amount of work being undertaken in children and families to look at the particular pressures in the SEN area, and the growth required in this area is to support the business intelligence to enable that work to be undertaken. And then the other area is in the environment and transport, and that, as you'll see, talks about operational data in the highways related area and to support climate emergency work. So obviously all very areas of high importance to the council, and that is why the particular pressures in the department in that area have resulted in a growth bid. And then G19, the broadband area of work, you'll see the reference there just to the growth over the next 4 years, reducing though to zero by 2024-25. I think Tom's on the call if you have any specific queries in relation to that. And then the next area is in an area that I'm more familiar with, legal services. And this is simply a capacity related growth in two particular areas, adult social care litigation and the contracts work, both of which are under significant pressure. And unfortunately, when we're not able to deliver services in-house, we have to externalise them or secure locum support, both of which are more costly than engaging staff internally. So that is naturally the preference that we would have. So those are the growth areas. I think I won't be able to ask Anthony to help you with the legal area, and I can cover that. But if you have any questions, as I say, Mr. Purnell is on the line and will be able to answer any questions that you have in relation to the other two areas of growth.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Yes, I saw you were intending to bring in more in-house in order to reduce the amount of having to use outside legal help, which I know is very expensive. So I'm sure you've looked at that, and this is the most efficient way to do it as well, particularly with bringing back perhaps specialist expertise in highways. That we had anyone dedicated doing that. I mean, we all remember John Prendergast, who was here for many years, but
yes,
bringing back his post in a way.
We do have a highway solicitor, and it is an area of intense pressure of work in that area, but this is more around contractual work to support the highways function. So we've referred there to some of the large procurement processes. You'll see those are the sort of jobs that are extremely time consuming, and it's very important you have the right level of expertise on those sorts of very, very high level, high value contracts. And they are probably much better managed in-house.
Okay, and then on the adult social care, additional resources there, note you put help drafting robust responses. I mean, who can you just say who are we litigating with there, mostly in adult social care? Who are we having? Are we presumably we're doing our best for to support the individuals and their needs, but I'm wondering who we're having to challenge on that.
Yes, it's a combination of cases. There are court of protection cases where adults don't have capacity to manage their own affairs, and so you will have those occasions when you have to deprive people of their liberty. So the old, what they're called DOLS cases, deprivation of liberty cases that have to go be approved by the court. Also areas where there are disputes with family members about where people should be placed, elderly or people with lacking capacity. So they are also sort of resolved by the Court of Protection. So that's the jurisdiction that we're working on there.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions on the Chief Executive's budget and the growth items? We're all happy with that to support this work. I mean,
thank you. Shall I move on then to the savings, Chairman?
Yes, please.
So that's at paragraph 19 onwards. We've identified a number of sort of heads really to approach this on. The first one we've referred to here is a business support review. We're confident that across the department, between all of us, we'll be able to identify £50,000 in savings by looking at how we're doing our business support, whether we're doing it in the most efficient way, whether there's any duplication, whether we can streamline and digitalise where possible. The second area you've touched on already this morning, Chairman, in relation to staffing and managing vacancies. We've introduced already a sort of subgroup of our departmental management team which scrutinises each appointment. So whenever a vacancy arises, we examine it in detail and challenge whether it's necessary to appoint to that post or whether it can be managed in a different way. We also use that to challenge the appointments of locum staff and also any sort of regrading type issue. So that's an important area.
Yeah, fine, thanks.
Sorry, I don't know if...
Sounds like someone's broken in on a call. Just hold on one sec. Or somebody's took a call. So can everyone mute if you're not presenting, please? Okay. Thank you,
Shall
Lauren.
I carry on? Thank you. Sorry about that. Then the third area, we've identified paperless meetings. We've started operating in that way already, and we're proposing to carry on with that, and anticipating that will save around £30,000. And the fourth area relates to an increase in fee income on a sort of phased basis over the next 3 years, starting at £25,000 and rising to £100,000. So that's the planning application fee income, but also our traded income. And then that cumulatively gives a total of £380,000 against a target of £600,000. The additional savings of £320,000, we've got a couple of areas we've identified there, looking at case management and a review of economic development. It's obviously an ongoing process, but it's something we're conscious of all of the time, and we'll be working over the next period of time to identify that additional savings target. It's obviously becoming increasingly difficult to do so, but we're committed to do that, and working with Judith Spence, whose helpful advice we always value. And then we've got a short section then just on external influences and the factors that we have to have in the back of our mind. So we've touched on obviously the COVID issues, which will affect all of us, the EU withdrawal agreement and the impact of that, which we're working through, the fact that we're a demand-led service, and the fact that we're subject to external central government requirements in relation to planning fee income, which is one of the significant areas that we've identified to achieve the savings. Should I pause there if there are any questions?
Yes, that would be helpful. Thank you, Lauren, for presenting that. Dr. Einan.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank Lauren for an excellent report. I wanted to comment that I'm very pleased with the move to paperless meetings. £30,000 is a lot of money, but it's also the trees, so that's a good one. But I wanted to concentrate on point 21. The time lag where a post is to be recruited. How are we going to ensure that we don't end up making this being a false economy if we overwhelm our existing staff, and if they end up going off sick, that'll add to our costs. Can we be reassured that this will be done in a way that doesn't actually add to our problems?
Yes, it's a very good point you make. It is a balancing exercise, and you're right. We wouldn't. The time lag really happens almost inevitably because of the time to undertake a recruitment exercise and then for people to hand in their notice. There is a sort of natural time lag. I don't think we're intending to exploit it beyond that. And you're right that the pressure on staff is something that we always have to have in mind. We wouldn't delay an appointment and that might cause that sort of pressure on staff. We'd always try and plug that gap if we had to through temporary resources. But I think the reference really to the time lag here is really a reflection of what happens in practice anyway, because of the time between someone handing their notice in and getting someone in post. Or sometimes there is a little gap. We're not planning for that, but it's a happy coincidence that it does result in a little saving.
Thank you. That's somewhat reassuring. Thank you.
Thank you.
So echo the comments about paperless meetings, also saving paper and trees. But if, as we hope, we get back to some sort of normality and we do start having committee meetings again, and particularly full council, are officers giving thought then to how members will access? So I suppose one option would be to just bring in your handheld device and that's how you access it. But obviously, if we're not going to have paper going forward, then we do need to ensure that meetings that do take place, as it were, back at County Hall, that there is provision to access the information. Because there are a range of, most people now, of course, do have the Surface Pros, which I guess you could just bring with you. But we will need a process to manage that once we're going forward when COVID is sorted out.
Yes, I agree, and I'm sure that's something that Graham and his area and most CDAP will be working on to make sure we have a system that works for members, but at the same time minimises the use of paper.
Okay. Alan Pearson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to add that Transport and Environment, we had the first paperless meeting, and when we discussed it, we did then discuss a major screen where their agenda comes on. That's not only just for other members, but also we have public that attend, so they can actually see the contents and how we work. So a thought has gone into it. So being paperless, we don't turn up and we can't see things, or we have lack of access with computers. It's there, it's presented for everybody as well as the individual devices. So we're definitely thinking about it. And also, it's not just the cost of paper, it's the post. The postal costs are astronomical, the size of the document. So it's a whole range, and it was agreed, and I think most of the committee members sitting, David and Bill as well, David and Bill, they realised and I think started working a bit more on the computers. So for all of us, it works. I'd just like to add that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on the savings in Chief Execs? Right. Lead members for this area is obviously still, I think, still with us. Is Nick? He covers some areas. Blake Payne covers regulatory services, broadband delivery, minerals and waste, and Mrs. Richardson, equalities, rural communities. If any of you are here and you wish to make a statement, please do. If not, I will continue. Okay.
You can continue, Simon.
Still see no hands going up, so that's fine. Right. So do you want to just talk about the capital programme then, please, Lauren?
Yes, just the last couple of paragraphs, reference to the capital programme at 1.9 million, all bar 100,000 of which relates to the superfast broadband project, and the £100,000 to the Shire community grants programme, which members take an interest in and have valued that programme over the years. There's nothing really else I can say about that, I think, Mr. Galton.
Okay. Any questions on the capital programme? None. Right. Okay. Well, that completes looking at the Chief Exec's department. Thank you very much, Lauren, for taking us through that. I'm not aware that there are any other members that wish to ask a question or make a comment. No, I can't see any hands up. So, yep, we'll finish on that one, and we'll move on to the Corporate Resources Department, which is the next item on our agenda, item 10. And the purpose of this report is obviously to look at the revenue aspects of the whole Corporate Resources Department, which covers a wide area. It's not just finance, it delivers a range of services, property, and so on and so forth. So I'll ask Chris Tambini to introduce the report. Lead members for this area is Mr. Rhodes, who I can see is still with us, and Mr. Shepherd, who I can see is with us. And then after Chris, if either of you want to add anything, make a statement, and then we'll take questions. So, Chris, you're going to start off with the revenue aspects.
I will do. So if it's okay, Chair, I'll split it into two. So I'll go from paragraph 1 to paragraph 20. So a few opening comments and then talk about growth, pause there, then into go into savings and the capital programme. I've also got Jane Glasgow, Gordon McFarlane and Declan still on the call as well. So the assistant directors in Corporate Resources Department. When I introduced the main report, I stressed the uncertainty around the overall budget, and I suppose there's no difference in terms of the corporate resources departmental budget. And the one area I kind of wanted to highlight up front is commercial. And there are references to this throughout the report, but I thought I'd pull it all together in terms of my opening comments. The gross budget on the commercial, the kind of traded services is 16 million and has external income of approaching 18 million pounds. So it's quite a major undertaking. And if you look at the components of that budget, the main trading partner is schools. The main kind of services are kind of hospitality and food. And the key service area is school food. We've all got cafe and county hall catering. Bow Manor kind of outdoor pursuits, and it kind of goes without saying that all those kind of areas are going to be severely challenged by the pandemic, both in terms of what's happened in the year to date and probably what's going to happen during the best part of next year as well. We have used furlough. We have used some of the support provided by government around sales fees and charges to limit losses in the short term. But I think it's kind of goes without saying that next year is going to be kind of fairly challenging with those services. And given the uncertainty, it's difficult to really gauge exactly what the impact will be. But just to stress that it is a major risk, but we are looking to mitigate that risk as far as we possibly can. Compared to that, the other elements of the budget, although challenging, I'm far more confident that we're going to kind of meet the budget figures that you got in front of you. But on the commercial one, there's just the level of uncertainty is fairly huge. If I go on to growth now, I was going to pass it over to Jane Glasgow because the key elements of growth actually relate to kind of IT. So I'll pass over to Jane. Are you on the line, Jane?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I'm here. So we have one significant item of growth from an IT perspective, and that's around the Microsoft licensing. Every 3 years, the Crown Commercial Services negotiates on behalf of local authorities with Microsoft so that we have a standard agreement in place that's favorable compared to the private sector. And we have done reviews and identified that we are getting a significantly better deal than private sector organizations would get to. However, what does happen is that we see a price increase every 3 years as a result. Microsoft have many different reasons for doing this, ranging from currency fluctuations to blaming Brexit and a number of other causes. But last time round, we saw an increase over a 3-year period from just over 800,000 to approximately 1.2 million. This time around, we're very connected to Crown Commercial. We have been talking to them and providing feedback all the way through the process, and they're looking to sign the new agreement over the next couple of months. Our licensing agreement ends in July of this year, although our payment will cover the next, as into the next financial year, and we're expecting a fairly significant increase again. There's also a combined factor in there around the change in our working model and the change in how telephony and collaboration services work, programs such as Skype, Teams, Office 365, SharePoint, and so forth. We're seeing about 20,000 online meetings a month in the authority now compared to a few hundred before COVID. And even as the organization changes and shifts back into more people in the office, we expect to see those numbers increase. Our current telephony system, which is Skype, we need to migrate off of that by 2025. And once we understand the details of the new enterprise license agreement with Microsoft, we'll be doing an analysis of when is the most appropriate time to do that to give a balance between productivity and cost benefit. But all of those costs are in there as part of that growth bid, with us seeing 400,000 and then moving on to 685 per year. Of course, we'll take every action we can to mitigate those costs moving forward.
Okay, thanks for that. So the increase in the licenses wasn't just kind of them taking the opportunity to put the price up during the pandemic when everyone was absolutely reliant on it. This was forecast as part of a cycle, was it? It wasn't sort of just taking the chance to make some more money.
No, I think it is typical behavior for them. The cost increase that we're seeing this time appears to be lower than we saw in the last round. It was significantly higher. As I said, I think they blamed Brexit on it at the time, but at this point, it is a much reduced price increase.
Okay, right. Chris, did you want to say any more on this section, or I'll just see if there's any questions?
Nothing more from me on this section, Simon.
Right. Okay. I mean, I did notice that the budget's going up. I know you're going to talk about growth and savings, but in terms of the base, compared to this current year, the budget's going up, but then you've got some transfers, so it's not all pressures, is it? It's something new coming in that's been transferred into the budget that wasn't there previously.
It's transfers. So if you look at it, the actual kind of savings are bigger than the growth. And I must admit, I feel slightly embarrassed. I can't remember what the transfer is.
Declan?
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you look down on paragraph 12, it just sort of splits them out, and it's inflation primarily.
So you're picking up inflation for all the departments then?
No, it's just inflation related to corporate resources services. So corporate resources picked up a big because of areas like school food where they're sort of below the £24,000 annual salary. Sorry, actually, I'm getting this. So that's next year, isn't it? So for the current year, this was sort of pay awards, and the pay awards were heavily skewed towards the lower pay staff. So because you've got big areas like school food, this is where we've had to pick up a lot of costs.
Right, okay. So this is the point that often inflation, you read inflation's running at 1% or 1 point, but actually that doesn't reflect the demands, the budget demands.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you look at general sort of CPI type inflation, it reflects a sort of basket of household goods it's often referred to, but the cost pressures on the authority tend to be more around those kind of those sort of pay award type things, although there is other costs in there. Jane touched on some of them on IT. You've got property running costs, utility costs, things like that, but yeah, it doesn't reflect your CPI basket of goods very well at all.
Okay, right. Byron or other lead members, have you any comments you wish to make on the corporate resources budget?
I think the only point I would make is that we are going to, during the course of the next year, going to have to do a great deal of thinking about the future use of our buildings. As you know, the COVID epidemic or pandemic has given rise to a completely different way of working, and of course we had to spend quite a lot of money on IT. And the great majority of our employees now are working from home or working remotely in some fashion. Now, when things get back to normal, we expect that there will be a preference for working in that way for many people, not all, and that there will be a limited number of people who will come back into our buildings. So we will have to seriously think about the use of our buildings and the extent of our buildings in the future. And that is going to be a major area of activity, and of course it will also affect our costs. And most particularly once we think of County Hall, with a huge amount of space we have there, and much of it will be underutilised. It gives us opportunities, of course, that if other people need buildings, we can increase the number of tenants that we've got, and of course we also have the opportunity of reducing the number of outbuildings that we lease or rent or indeed own out in the beyond County Hall. So there are some big changes there. Now I don't think we have fully costed what the effect of that is. We put in the immediate costs of because we still have these buildings, but there may be savings in the future that we can make. But of course there will be some compensating expenses as we improve our IT, because although quite remarkable things have been done with IT in the last 12 months, not least of its provision of laptops and Surface Pros and so on. I think I'm sure Jane Glasgow would agree with me. Much more needs to be done and can be done in the future, and still needs to be thought about. And on the school food side of things, of course, we have this tremendous uncertainty of on the employment side there. I mean, we've had huge numbers of people we had to furlough, and then when the schools weren't there, then the schools went back, so we brought them back to work. And now if the schools are closed again, or not completely closed, but certainly they're only open to children of key workers, so it's had another effect on our school food workforce. And then of course we've also got places like Beaumont Hall, which effectively is mothballed, but we're still carrying the cost of it. So there are going to be some big decisions to take in the future. Now's not the time to take them, nor can we forecast what the full implications are going to be. But there are going to be a considerable number of changes arising from the pandemic.
Okay, thank you, Byron. That's obviously looking to the future. Any points or questions on this, or we'll move on to look at the growth and savings? No, I haven't got anyone. All happy. So Chris, do you want to talk about growth and savings?
Yeah, I think so far we probably covered the key elements of growth in terms of what Jane said. So if I just start with the savings, I mean, the savings over the 4-year period are around kind of the 2.5 million mark, and they're obviously contained in the table in the report. I was just going to comment on the two biggest ones. In a way, kind of Byron has outlined some of the kind of the workplace pressures and potential kind of opportunities from the workplace programme. We've got a saving in there of 670,000 over 4 years, and a lot of that is going to be around kind of getting out of some of our kind of satellite offices and reducing some of those costs. As Byron has said, there are some big uncertainties there. This is actually a pre-pandemic programme of work. I mean, the pandemic has definitely accelerated it. We're hoping actually we can get a bit more in terms of savings, more than that 670,000. We'll have to kind of see how we get on. But I'd say that's the biggest element of saving, and there are some uncertainties around that. The other one, which I won't go into because the next report on the agenda is around the Corporate Asset Investment Fund. But again, we've got a fairly sizable kind of extra income coming through that of £570,000. We've taken a fairly prudent view and only factored in those schemes that we're pretty certain about. So that's the second biggest one. Shall I go on to capital as well? I haven't got that much to say in terms of capital. It's the usual kind of programme for corporate resources, you know, kind of focused on things like property maintenance and IT kind of investment, and also a little bit around kind of climate change and energy efficiencies. I haven't got really a lot more I wanted to add to the report. The one thing I would say is that there's quite a sizable one around kind of accessibility around Sytonby Farm, which is a farm we own on the north of Melton, which we're planning to sell for capital receipts. Is that we got the potential for a Homes England grant to do some work on that. We are working through the conditions of that grant, so it's not certain that we are going to accept that. And if we don't accept that, some of that kind of expenditure will fall away because it is grant funded. So that's all I was going to say for the second two kind of elements of that report, Simon.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions on the department's capital budget? Right, I haven't got anyone wishing to comment on that. Right, so we've pretty much covered the corporate resources department. Byron, anything to conclude, or Richard Shepherd?
No, nothing further to say.
Okay, right, thank you very much. Right, so all we need to do now is go on and just consider anything that had come forward from the other overview and scrutiny committees. There was a supplementary paper available over the weekend setting out what they'd looked at, but I would look to the chairman of those particular committees if there's anything they wish to say about the scrutiny of the Mtfs and their budget, or any key issues that they think that we as the commission, looking at the overall situation, should be aware of. So just go through those committees. Terry Richardson first on adults.
Thank you, Chair. So I think I made some comments about some of the initiatives which I think we should be rightly proud of as a council that have taken place, particularly the TOM and the digital assistive technology going forward. But apart from that, I mean, I think the only thing that sort of I think keeps the committee awake at night is the lack of forward detail on the Better Care Fund, because it makes up some 12 or 13% of the income for adults communities. Any changes to the Better Care Fund will be significant, or could be significant, in either direction. So I'd echo the comments that have already been made, particularly by Byron on this and Nick, is that, you know, without that visibility of forward funding, planning becomes difficult. With the greater integration of social care and the NHS as well, there is scope for the need to perhaps move funding backwards and forwards between the two, and it's not always clear how that comes from the NHS. They seem to be more adept at hanging on to theirs and not passing it on when they should. But they're the concerns, I think, from the Adult and Scrutiny Committee. But I pay testament to to the director and the officers for the work they've done and the support that they've given throughout this, particularly work in areas like infection control and other such areas, and keeping more people in their homes, which hopefully will have kept them safer than they would otherwise have been. But it is clear, I think, through this that there may be a radical change in how people view where their elderly relatives go and the need perhaps to keep them at home, which I think is to be welcomed, what social care looks like going forwards. And again, there is still something in the area about the aspiration of looking at whether or not the council can get involved in the provision of better quality social care provision, be it through several different types of extra care facilities, supported living and care homes going forward. So I think there are key areas for adults communities to look at, but I think they're all from the perspective of providing the best solution for the residents in Leicestershire, and that has always come in front of quite frankly the pennies. We've saved money in spite of making things better, not because of.
Okay, thank you. Children's and families, any comments to make on children's and families?
Thank you very much, Chairman. As you can imagine, we had a very full and frank discussion, and it was very interesting. Children and families is one of our most key services, and with a lot of things are still not known. We don't know yet the full effect of the children who've been missing school, not only the ones that are in our care, but overall what pressures may come through, and thus may come into SEND with mental problems, schools, then learning to work. It's a very difficult situation. Like Terry, I cannot thank and appreciate the officers in this department who've done such sterling work, and particularly for our children in care, managing to keep in touch with them regularly every week, making sure they're okay, and the vulnerable children that we look after as well. It's a high cost department, but on the other hand, we are all corporate parents, and it's up to us to ensure the children in our county do not suffer any more than we would like our own children to have suffered. So therefore, it's a moving feast at the moment. We're not quite sure what's going on, but we are looking at it and everything. And we're looking at the director, and all her staff have done an amazing job. But a lot of the people that are in this meeting today actually sit on that committee, the Scrutiny Overview and Scrutiny Panel. So we are fully aware of what's going forward, but it is a challenging time, particularly for our children and young adults, because now we're moving up to not only the 0 to 18-year-olds, of course, we have some responsibilities for the up to 25s as well.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Alan Pearson, anything on environment and transport?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, can.
Oh, that's good. Because the camera. Yes, so just a few things. Roads. We're still working hard to keep the quality. The feedback we get was some very positive feedback. I do once again believe the officers do a tremendous job. And I still say, when I do drive around, as I do with work and other meetings around the country, I'm always pleased to note that our roads in a lot of cases are far superior. You just have to go over some of the borders with our neighbours to realise that. But the pressure is on. The smaller roads, the lower graded roads, we have issues, and we just need to keep an eye on it. The other major issue we've discussed, and to work with other departments on this, is to do with SEN transport, the cost of transport. If you read the budget, it's massive. It's going to be something we don't control. It's more or less it's there and it's passed on to us. We don't do the assessments, etc. So what we've requested is to work with some of the other scrutiny committees and get a group together. And I think it was agreed with the lead of the cabinet lead that we start finding out how it works, what are the processes, how we can manage it better, how we can understand it better, because of the cost going in the future, and what can we do to help? Because in the end, any assessment is the most vulnerable are the most important. So we've got to make sure we spend the money wisely. And I just feel that was a very good across the whole committee. We all agreed, and throughout the year on a number of issues, the group has. The Environment Transport have worked together, and I said earlier we did do the first meeting, which we're quite proud of, paperless. It's gone very well, and it's nice to hear that being mentioned at the meeting tonight and the funds it saved. But in the whole, as a group, we've worked very hard together, and it's we continue to do so for the benefit of all the residents of Leicestershire.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan. And last but not least, health, Dr. Felton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chairman. Just comment, I can see how warm it is in Australia from Alan's face. Obviously very much a difference over here. Yes, health. We didn't get into anything to do with COVID costs, because clearly they've had to base the budget on what would be a normal year, if I can call it that. And the time will come when we'll obviously have to look at all those costs, but not for the medium term at this stage. That's how it's left. There's a very small growth items, primarily involved with, I mean, hopefully everyone's read the documents anyway, but we're looking at putting some money into a particular drug that's related to retrovirals, which is very important. It's only small, but it's part of it. And obviously, for the savings point of view, we're looking again at the GP health check work service, see if any savings can be made, and also the First Contact Plus, hoping there won't be any particular great savings, but we need to look at all the efficiencies we can make. And lastly, clearly the biggest point, although it wasn't part of the Mtfs, is the work that's obviously been going on in the public health department. I mean, Mike Sands is now famous on television, almost screen, radio, the lot, isn't he? Doing a fantastic job. Plus, obviously, all his other consultants that work in the department as well. And I think, as time goes by, I think it'd be absolutely obvious that the amount of incredible effort they've been doing on behalf of the people of Leicestershire, and we're all very grateful for that. But as I said, in terms of the Mtfs, we haven't looked at COVID costs as such, because that's external, if I can call it that, externally funded. So that's all we had, really. Thanks very much, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I think we'd all want to echo those comments you've made about the public health team and the work they've been doing and will continue to do, I imagine, for some considerable time yet. Right, so that completes our look at the Mtfs for this year. It's onward now to the Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time, and then to full council for the precept setting and formalities there. I would like to thank the officers and the Cabinet leads that have come and presented this morning. I think we've had a good discussion. Just sum up the situation again, is that this is obviously 1 year settlement, and the future is extremely uncertain and challenging. But we have given it a good look this morning in terms of scrutinising the proposal. So yeah, thank everyone for that. Now I think we can finish this agenda without having to go into this afternoon. We may need to just run over lunch, but I think it's better to get that done. But we've got 2 more reports to do, but I would just like to have a short 5-minute comfort break so people can do things they need to do. Now my agenda is showing 12 and 13 the wrong way round. Joe, can you just tell us, are we doing the revised corporate asset fund next?
Sorry, yes we are. Good start.
Yeah, we're doing that next, so we'll have John Bennett and Byron staying with us for that. But it's 12:23. Can I say we'll start again at 12:30? On and continue with this meeting. We're now going to look at the draft revised corporate asset investment fund. We're joined by John Bennett this morning, head of strategic property services, and of course Chris Tambini, the director, is still here, and Byron Rhodes, the lead member for this area, is still with us. Now, John, you're going to introduce this report. I've got the impression that this is a bit of a holding report, and you are in fact doing a wider review of the service, but no doubt you'll cover that in your introduction.
Simon, is a bit of a change of plan. So I'm going to introduce it as Chris Tambini here, and then if John wants to add anything at the end, he can.
Okay, please carry on.
Right. So if I kind of kick off, I mean the cave strategy, to be honest, is usually a pretty kind of dry document. Includes the objective of the corporate asset investment fund, legal context, acquisition process, etc. And this document does set out all those elements. I know there's been no real change in terms of those elements in terms of previous years. And I know members are pretty familiar with the way the corporate asset investment fund actually operates. However, given that we have been operating the fund since 2014, this year, on the back of things like the COVID and Brexit, etc., we have commissioned a review of the investment strategy. We just thought it was timely to do so. So I'm really going to limit my comments to the outcome of that review. But before I go into the overall findings, I think it's worth just kind of mentioning the impact that COVID has had on the corporate asset investment fund. And if I'm to be honest, we seem to be weathering the storm fairly well. So there has been an impact. There has been delay to some of our construction projects, etc. But overall, the actual income is holding up pretty well, and that's probably kind of suggests that the actual processes that are set out in the cave strategy are working. So that they do result in impact on the sectors that we're planning to invest in, the impact on the quality of tenants that we want in our properties, and the quality of properties. I'm not being complacent on this, but I do kind of think it's worth kind of mentioning that the cave strategy is continuing to deliver despite what has been a massive impact of the pandemic. If I can draw your focus to paragraph 21 of the covering report, and I'll talk to that. And this sets out the key recommendations of the external review that was undertaken by Hymans. So if the first one was the first kind of key recommendation was that we should continue to direct our investment on property assets such as industrial distribution and logistics, especially given our location as a county in the heart of England and the national transport network. So we should increase our kind of our weighting to those sectors. In terms of kind of office and rural sectors, the recommendation was that we should maintain our weighting at current levels. Members will have noticed that retail sector isn't mentioned in those recommendations, and the reason why it's not mentioned is that we've kind of steered clear of that kind of that sector in the past, and it's clearly taken a massive hit from the pandemic, kind of exploiting some of the weaknesses in the sector that were coming from increasing use of online shopping. So it's not a sector that we're planning to invest in, and I say we haven't in the past anyway. The focus of our direct investment has been around industrial and office, and the industrial sector as kind of fared fairly well over recent years. And although offices, we have invested in offices, again we had no real massive impact in terms of the pandemic, probably reflecting actually the nature of some of our tenants. We've got central government in some of our offices, and we've got high quality tenants in some of the other offices. The other kind of key recommendations was around kind of some of our pooled property investment and investment in other elements. So what the Hymans are suggesting is that we look at our pooled property and maybe reduce some of our weighting to pooled property kind of over time, and maybe invest some of that money in more attractive investments, which I'll come on to. So that they're also suggested that the investment we've got in private debt is maintained and possibly increased. Again, that's actually performed fairly well over recent years, and we're starting to get some of that money back in because it is time limited investment. So that money is starting to come back in. So we'll be looking at whether we invest in that fund or a different fund in terms of the future. And they've also suggested that we should consider investing in infrastructure more widely and things like renewables. We've we've often thought we should be looking at infrastructure, but one of the kind of structural issues with infrastructure, the reason why we haven't done it so far, is a lot of it is actually outside the UK, which is a bit of an issue. And because of the exchange rate and the weakness of sterling, it wasn't a particularly good time to even consider that. But it is something that we can look at. And we can look at the things like investment in renewables, solar farms, etc. Something that we can actively consider. They've also suggested investing in housing, be that the rental sector or student accommodation. And that, again, that's something that we could do. We will be doing a little bit more work on that. There are some technical issues around doing that when you're a council, in terms of kind of right to buy, etc. So it is something that we would have to look at, and probably potentially we would need to set up a housing company of some sort if we were to go down that route. In terms of taking those suggestions forward, what we're planning to do is over the kind of the remainder of the early part of this year is do some more work on those. So this strategy isn't saying that we're definitely going to do that, but by you kind of agreeing it, you're not saying we're suddenly going to dive into student accommodation, because anything in terms of future investments would need to be taken back to cabinet. But it's just really kind of sets out a direction of travel. It's fairly iterative. There's no kind of major changes in terms of what they're suggesting, but it's been a useful actual exercise, and I think it'll kind of help us kind of focus in terms of where we do put our future investments, given that the fund is still in the growing stages of its development. I'm going to stop there. Just wonder whether John Bennett wants to come in and say anything at the end.
Anything to add, John?
Yes, thank you, Chris. Thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate Chris's point with regard to the strength of the fund over the pandemic year since last March, we haven't had any of our tenants go bankrupt during that time, and therefore we've had no voids as a direct result of the pandemic. We've had in the early part some changes to rental payments going to monthly rather than quarterly, just from a cash flow point of view. But our net position now is that none of our tenants are, unless the old historic debts, are behind in their payments. And in terms of how the development side of things has dealt with the pandemic, we've made 34 new lettings in the year since March. So okay, it's been a little harder to get people in and get them around, etc., etc. But the product that we have is still sufficiently attractive to the market that we've done 20 new lettings at our Apollo Court and at Airfield Farm, and the Lucep letting finally completed in November, but also 14 lettings in our historic office and industrial portfolio as well. So the fund at its core is strong, and it's being very resilient over this year. But as Chris said, we're not being complacent. Thank you.
Okay, no, that's helpful. So just in terms of this possible infrastructure investment, because that is one that puzzled me. So you say that might have to be abroad. What would be our role in this? Would we be actually funding the private sector to build infrastructure, or would we actually be involved in the construction of it? I'm not clear where we would be committing our resources to if we went with that option.
I suppose there's two ways we could do it. So you could do some direct investment. So, for example, a solar farm. If there was wanted to build a solar farm within Leicestershire, which clearly we've got one within the capital programme, that would count as an element that relates to infrastructure or renewables. So you could do directs. Or the other alternative is to, and what we have done in the past, is piggybacked on the back of our pension fund expertise to look at a fund where we could get exposure to a number of different infrastructure assets without holding them directly, and kind of use the investment expertise in terms of investment managers who kind of run that fund. So there's two ways of doing it. We could end up doing a bit of both, but again, it's something that we'll look at. And always with these investments, we have kind of piggybacked on the pension fund expertise. in terms of kind of the due diligence, etc. So again, it's something that we'll be looking at, say, over the early part of this year.
Okay, thank you. I've got Terry Einan next, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this very interesting report and very, very timely, I think. And it is good to see that we've managed to maintain the profitability of this fund. I guess my concern is comes from the main document, page 114 in our papers, page 10 in the Corporate Asset and Investment Fund Strategy, where it suggests that the investment criteria, and I'm aware that these probably haven't changed that much, but the suggestion that we take more of account of location, and I think members of the public might be somewhat concerned. The idea that clearly it's true that the strength of an investment has to be considered in relation to its location. Of course, it is. A house in Colville is worth about a tenth of what it would be worth in London. But I think we've also got to, as the council, bear in mind our strategic plan and economic growth plan and county-wide local industrial strategy. And so how are we going to ensure that, though obviously it makes more economic sense for this strategy to invest in areas that are economically buoyant, how are we going to balance that against the need to politically to be investing in Leicestershire, because this is the county council that we are?
Okay.
Shall I pick that up? I mean, if you look at the track record, I mean, generally we have invested in Leicestershire, and particularly around some of our industrial properties. I mean, anything we've built has always been in Leicestershire, and I can't envisage a time when we would be building something outside Leicestershire. I just can't see it being a possibility. So generally, but the vast majority of our investment has been within Leicestershire. I can't particularly see that changing. So although location is kind of important, we will be looking to invest within the county. And I do take the point around, although primarily when we set up on this track of setting up the corporate as investment fund, it was about making a meaningful contribution in terms of the Mtfs. Do accept, and within the document you can see we do accept that there are wider benefits, and that you've touched on, Dr. Einan, in terms of economic growth, etc. So although they are secondary objectives, that they are there within the document, so they do carry a certain amount of weight.
Can I just comment then, because I think it's saying that 75% of investment would be in Leicestershire and 25% outside is in the document. I think that the public would like to be reassured that this, that wherever possible, the funding will be to benefit Leicestershire rather than somewhere else.
Yeah, I think I can give you that assurance. It is predominant. We do invest within Leicestershire, and actually, when you look at the investments we've made outside Leicestershire, they're generally very close to the border. So we're not one of these authorities that invested in a travel lodge in Glasgow. It's not something we do. They've been within half an hour kind of drive or so of Leicestershire. So even when we've done it, they've been pretty close to the border, and probably within in terms of the kind of the economic sub-region in terms of Leicestershire, they do sit within that region. But I'll say, yeah, the vast majority have been investments within the county.
Okay, Terry, you reassured?
Yes, I just hope the public are also. The document perhaps isn't as clear on this as Chris Tambini has been.
Okay, anything to add on this, Byron?
Yes, I mean, just not to take away anything Chris has just said, and he's answered that question very diplomatically that Terry put. But in fact, my priorities, the first one in any investment will be the security of the investment and its validity. We will not invest in anything which is not it doesn't have a high degree of security for the future, and for the its long-term marketability if we had to dispose of it, and also for its security in terms of the amount of yield that it will give us. So yield is very important to us. We're also looking for flexibility as well, because we're using money which is earmarked for other things in the longer term, and so at some point we would be looking to perhaps dispose of that property, and so we need to be sure that we are able to do that. The location, of course, then comes after that, because those other things are actually more important. And of course we do have some investments out of county which we're quite happy with, only one or two admittedly, but we do have those. So it's what I would make, and this is where I perhaps have a difference of opinion with Terry Ingham, is that these decisions are not made for political reasons. They're made for sound business reasons to support the county council's main programmes, and that I think is the most important thing. If you go down the road of making investments just for political reasons, then you're starting to be beguiled into taking increased risk, and that is not something that I'm inclined to do. And the other thing I just want to mention about this report, it's not yet been considered by the KFED board, the advisory board, and so that will need to happen in due course. We could not be able to meet yet, of course, to do that. But at the moment we're not in the business of making any investments simply because of the uncertainty of the market. So it's really a holding report, which is a review of what we already have, and what it has not pointed out is any particular investments which we need to dispose of, other than the pool property which they've talked about, and we can certainly consider that.
Okay, thank you very much, Byron. Now I've got Rosita next.
Thank you, Chairman. So far, everything I've heard has been quite reassuring, and I think, Chris, you need to thank all of your teams all across the board, because noting how difficult the financial situation and the pressures are, they have done extremely well, and I think all of the reports have been wonderful. It's just one thing that really sort of disturbs me, and far be it from me to argue with the professionals, but for instance, Hyman is suggesting that we invest in student accommodation when potentially we are told that the city and Loughborough have over allocated already. And then noting the comments that the future state of the country as large, and as you earlier mentioned, it could appear that, or not appear, it is quite apparent we are going into a crisis. And if we are going into a crisis with, as you said, 2 trillion, which would make it quite considerable for the country to repay, we then will have negative assets, and cash won't be king anymore. So all the emphasis, as Byron just said, is the security of our investment and our whatever we are owning, and the yield we're getting. So to me, one of the main stable things, which is our assets, and it cannot be changed, while cash can only be spent once, are our land holdings. And whilst they're not generating a great deal of yield, but that certainly is a major security for an uncertain future. Yet I notice in the report all the way through that there is an emphasis on less of rural investment and selling of assets, which I assume would be maybe our land, our country farms to develop on. So that me as a layman, not being Hyman's, but it worries me. So what is the stance of holding on to that as a future security rather than selling it off, getting cash and spending it once? And how much of our land investment would we actually sell off without council approval? You know, how much of a percentage? So just talk me around that for, well, for just general, for my information. And thank you again for all the work everybody's done. Over.
Thank you. Yeah, the work, just picking up the last point first, Rosita, the work Hyman's undertaken in terms of our rural land holdings, their recommendation was to maintain or reduce. And I think members know that over the last 5 years or so since we had the Corporate Housing Investment Fund, we've actually purchased more rural land holdings. So we've sold some and we've purchased some. And I must admit, over the years, we've just been selling rural land holdings when they get development opportunities and using it as a really good steady source of capital receipt. But of course, if you just keep selling and not buying, eventually you run out and you don't have that source of capital receipt in the future. So we did take a strategic decision some years ago to purchase some rural land holdings where we think there's going to be potential at some point in the future. So although they haven't recommended us to, in effect, kind of sell our rural land holdings, I think they're just saying to kind of look at them and just see whether there's any potential to sell some of them, which is what we do anyway, to be honest, when there are development opportunities. So I don't think should be too concerned that we're suddenly going to sell all our rural land holdings, because we're not, and that's not what Hyman's have recommended. Just picking up your other point around the kind of the difficulty with the wider economy, and I think you mentioned that that there's the potential for there to be a severe downturn or some kind of crisis and the impact on property that could arise from that. I think the main comment I'd say, clearly, as Byron said, we're not in a position where we're suddenly going to go out now and purchase a load of assets. It's not the right time to do it. But our time horizon as a local authority is pretty long. We haven't got a pressure from shareholders or whatever to want to get immediate return. So we do have a long time horizon, and that is something that we can use to our advantage kind of over that period. So although there will be ups and downs in the property market, and there always have been ups and downs in the property market, we would look to kind of ride those out and always have an eye on the very long term. And because we do have overall sound finances, we're not going to be in a position of a Nottingham or a Croydon or a Northamptonshire where they've had to sell their assets to balance their overall position. We're very much looking to create an asset base that's going to generate income to maintain our overall revenue position and making a meaningful impact on it. I hope that sets your mind at risk, Rosita.
Well, yes, except for one point, Chris. You said we have purchased some land, but that land, as far as I know, was only recently, and then we turned it over again for development land. So what I'm concerned it is the basket, the security basket, the rural land holdings we have got. So how far would we go on selling them off if development opportunities come along and if things become very unstable? So do we, because we've got to protect this for long term, well beyond when we are all gone. So, in your mind's eye, how far would you go, or percentage-wise, to sell our rural landholding off if development opportunities would arise? Or would we, as a corporate entity, say, we'll go, say, arguments out 50%, and 50% will be a stable, even without yield, a security blanket for the future?
I think it's difficult to be precise. I think you're inferring about Lutterworth East, where we sold some existing land holdings and then we purchased some to sell. We haven't sold any of it yet, but we purchased some to sell. But on top of that, I mean, John Bennett can probably come in. We have actually purchased some other rural land, which is currently being used as rural land. So we are adding to it as well as developing it. I don't know, John, you want to come in, John?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Chris. You know, we tend to keep a quite stable amount of rural land. You know, the land that we sell for housing from the existing estate tends to get replaced pretty quickly. So we're always on the lookout for land, especially land that is contiguous to our existing estate, where we can make, you know, currently borderline viable farms into much more viable farms for our tenants, and also, as Chris said, you know, for longer term investment. Lutterworth East is slightly different in that we were acquiring land specifically for development purposes rather than actually to increase the size of our rural estate at Lutterworth. So that was different, but the rural land within it, the original rural land, we will look to replace as and when
you just said the magic word, John, replace. That is all I wanted to hear. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Bill Bolter next, please.
Thank you. Yes, very briefly. I seem to remember we bought a car dealership some time ago. Is that still standing up in the portfolio? Is that, because I think the car showrooms have been closed now for some considerable time. So I wonder how that one was doing.
Can I ask that, Chris?
Yeah, you do that, John.
Yes, it was the Citroen dealership, part of the Bristol Street Motor Group in Leicester, just by the King Power Stadium. That was one of the tenants who moved into a monthly repayment between March and July last year, but it's actually thriving. They do a lot of click and collect, so people are, you know, buying their cars online and then collecting them from the showroom, but also, you know, doing the drop off for servicing. So yes, they are still very happy and paying their bills on time.
All right, Bill. All right, yeah. David Bill, you're next.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've mentioned the sale of county farms, and I just want to be consistent that I really have the deepest concern about the sale of the county farms in the Hinckley and Burbage, Stony Stanton area, because it's not just an asset, which of course is how the county looks at it. This is actually our countryside, and we view we view its disappearance with alarm, and we know the development pressure is there. So I just want to be consistent to say that I am still concerned about that. There's a reference here at the start of the report to 21. It talks about industrial distribution and logistics. This is fine, but again, I'm sorry to be negative, but we look around this area and along the A5, and what we see is huge sheds which seem to be getting bigger and bigger. They're all very colourful and all very attractive, but they're sheds nevertheless. And I suppose by being a member of the county council, I'm partly responsible for this. If we're now going to invest in these logistics and whatever we want to call it, but I would rather we didn't, quite frankly, because I'm not so sure that huge sheds provide that degree of a mixed range of employment that we really need to see. When it comes to Myra, that's fine, because you've got all kinds of new technology coming on stream there, and if we're losing countryside, then at least we're losing it to some sort of mixed extent, and there's a variety of work being provided. But I'm uncomfortable with these sheds, and I'm uncomfortable also with the feeling that because of the, as I said earlier, because of the confused arrangements with transport to Europe and the rest of the world, it's not at all clear to me that everything is going to carry on as smoothly as it did before. And lastly, we mentioned office investment and student accommodation. Well, as I think has been previously queried, student accommodation is largely empty now, I'd have thought, because most of the students are at home. They're working online from on home. And it's the same to some degree with office investment as well. Is there really that a continuing demand for new offices when so many people have now learnt how to do the same work from home and seem to be working fairly satisfactorily? So I'm just posing a few questions that occur to me just looking through this report. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, who wants to respond to Mr. Bill's comments?
So if I kick off, but John might want to say a few things
I'll
around.
as well after that. Yeah.
Yeah, do you want to go first, Byron? And then I'll.
If you like. Look, the priority in all this is business. It's whatever we buy has got to be profitable. It's got to be secure, and that can change from time to time as the business market changes. Right now, I don't think we would invest in any offices. More likely to dispose of them. We wouldn't probably invest in certain other enterprises. Well, we certainly don't invest in retail, but we haven't done that anyway. But a big shed's nothing like a big shed, or even a little shed. One of our members has got a little shed, and he arrived today. But a big shed's fine if it's in the right location and it's got a good tenant. And the tenant's prepared to put in to rent it over a long time and give us security, and we get a good rent for it. I'm not against those. Of course, they've got to get planning permission. That's where the political element comes in, and where the judgment of the local council comes in. But after that, I have no compunction about investing in a big shed if it's appropriate.
Right. Okay. Anything to add, Chris, to that?
I mean, the only thing I was, if you look at the different sectors that Hyman's have kind of gone through, and clearly kind of retail is not doing well. Retail wasn't doing well pre-pandemic. I mean, all the pandemic's done is really accelerated some of those changes that were going to come anyway, and a lot of the retail has ended up in all those sheds that you see kind of dotted around kind of the M1 and other major roads. So the logistics and industrial has done well. So that is an area, and actually we have been one of the beneficiaries of that in terms of the premises we've got at Airfield Farm and in Colville. So we have done fairly well out of that. And I'd echo just what Byron has said is that the reason we got into this is that when we looked at our overall funding position as a council, it looked kind of impossible to kind of to balance the budget without having a meaningful income coming from another source, hence why we went into the corporate asset investment fund, and that is a primary driver of it. And if we weren't doing it, basically we'd have to make bigger cuts in services. I don't know whether John Bennett, you want to say something particularly around kind of offices or student accommodation?
Yes, thanks, Chris. Thanks all. With regard to offices, I think one of the reasons why Hyman's put a note of caution with regard to offices, as well as the wider structural change of how people are working, was that our value of offices in the portfolio seemed to leap, and they just wanted to make sure that what we were doing wasn't investing in a particularly difficult sector at the moment. But what had happened was that the value of the land that we took the long lease on at Lucep increased in value because the building was completed and the lease was completed to the access group, so its value shot up. And so that's why it looks slightly overweighted in the office sector, but we have no plans to do any speculative office development anywhere. And as a sector, I think it's the same for everybody. With regard to student accommodation, That is just something we're looking at. We have nothing even within the our crosshairs at the moment as possibilities, and we'd be looking to de-risk it. So anything that we did do would probably be to provide a building to a university who take a lease on the whole thing. Then they could deal with the individual lettings beneath them, or if not the university, then a company like Unite or one of the other student development companies. But we're not in the business of actually property managing student accommodation. It would be for us to develop and then to lease the whole. But as I said, nothing on the horizon.
Okay, I think I've dealt with all the comments regarding this report. So you'll have picked up that there is an overriding concern about too many very large sheds, warehouses, call them what you like. As a county, there is a feeling that we could be over-dominated by them because of our central position. So I'm sure we'll come back to this as we move forward. So what's the next steps? Because it talks about further work being done. What happens next then in terms of the strategy?
Well, to certain we've only just had the report fairly recently, so we need to digest it and work our way through it. And to be honest, I know a number of members have mentioned the uncertainties around COVID and what that means for the property market. It doesn't feel like it's the best time to kind of jump in terms of big investments in particular areas. So I think we're going to kind of see out our current kind of pipeline of work, see how it develops over, the position develops in terms of COVID over the rest of the year, and then look at things like infrastructure and some of the other opportunities, and probably take something back to Cabinet and probably scrutiny on the way, if that sounds kind of reasonable approach. But it's so uncertain. I don't think we want to make any big strategic decisions at this moment anyway.
No, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so if you could bring it back to us if you're putting some more flesh on the bones at a later point. Thank you very much for coming this morning and presenting that report. Been a useful discussion. So we'll move on now to our last item, which is supporting economic recovery in Leicestershire. This report will be presented by Tom Pennell and Simon Lawrence. Which gentlemen, are you both with us?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Do you want to start off, Tom?
I will do. Yes, I'll be brief. I'll be brief, and then I'll hand over to Simon, who's got a presentation to briefly take you through. As has been mentioned a couple of times this morning, the county and the council face a substantial economic recovery challenge in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. The economic recovery effort forms part of the Local Resilience Forum's recovery programme, with the LEP leading an economic recovery cell of the LRF, and the County Council is fully involved in that. In fact, Simon Lawrence sits on that group, and the economic recovery work is also forms part of the Council's recovery strategy, which was agreed last year. The report focuses on the proposed economic recovery actions to be carried out by the County Council as part of that broader partnership response. Before I hand over to Simon, I just wanted to refer to sort of some of the underlying evidence that sits beneath the steps that we're taking, and Simon will touch on them in his presentation too. But paragraphs 5 to 9 of the report set out some of the unprecedented impacts of the pandemic on the economy. And you can see there the impact on unemployment, on business closures, and on some sectors, for example, retail, tourism and hospitality in particular. And there's much more detail on that in Appendix A. So the Business Intelligence Service within the Council is working closely with the LEP to monitor the economic impacts and to make sure that we've got the right evidence to inform how we move forward. So at this point, I'll hand over to Simon, who'll take you through the presentation, which will particularly focus on the proposed actions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Chair. Can members see the presentation?
Not yet. That's it. It's up now.
Okay, excellent. I will be brief given time, but thank you for that introduction as well, Tom. So the paper that was circulated as part of your pack hopefully was clear and comprehensive in terms of the picture that Tom's just set out. There is a report going to the Cabinet on the 5th of February, and comments from this commission can be included in that report. The next couple of slides just pick up some of the points that Tom's made around the unparalleled impact on the economy that the pandemic has had, both in terms of impact on youth unemployment generally, and this slide picks that up. And of course, we can make these slides available to members after the meeting. This slide then again picks up, again, as Tom said, the particular impact that the pandemic has had on certain sectors, particularly tourism, hospitality. So again, it's without question the impact that has had, and the appendix sets out that information in hopefully much more clear detail. The subsequent slides now just set out 3 or 4 areas that we're particularly focusing in upon and will be considered by the Cabinet in a couple of weeks' time. The first is the Kickstart scheme, which you'll be familiar with as a government initiative launched last September. The proposal for this council, though, is to go beyond the government scheme and to look to make placements of 12 months instead of 6, and also to look to seek support to those furthest from the labour market, including school leavers and including care leavers. Sorry, that's something that we want to do in partnership with the City Council, and the County Council is looking to identify 15 internal roles to provide support to Kickstart participants. We're also again looking to work with SMEs within the county to look to place up to another 90 placements over the next sort of 12 to 18 months. There is a cost associated with that extension, and that's something that sits within the Cabinet report, and subject to that approval and the arrangements with DWP, the plan would be to start to recruit to those positions March or April of this year. The next slide just quickly refers to Work Plus, which is a work club proposal for the county, reflecting the sort of, again, the unprecedented nature on unemployment caused by the pandemic, and that there will be many individuals facing the prospect of seeking work for the first time for a number of years and perhaps be unfamiliar with how jobs are now advertised, how people now recruit, and how social media plays a key part of that. So the proposal is to provide a universal offer for those people actively seeking work through 2 forms, one virtually, so online, so again an opportunity to for people to access that information without a face-to-face requirement, but also longer term over the next 12 to 18 months to make full use of our libraries network rolled out over that period. So again, there is a cost that will be considered by the Cabinet in February, but again, I'd suggest a very important component of the County Council's response to the economic impact within the county. The next couple of slides very quickly, Chair, pick up some of the business support work that the county's led over the last few months. So since the summer, we've handed out £750,000 to businesses through the Business Recovery Fund, supporting over 100 businesses, safeguarding jobs, creating jobs. And that's proved to be a very popular and successful grant scheme. Again, I'll not dwell on this slide, Chair, but this just sets out some of the responses successful applicants have made in terms of the ability for them to operate under difficult conditions. That funding, which was up to £10,000 and match funding, has been able to provide to them. The next slide, again, you'll be familiar, the Community Pub Grant Programme was launched just before Christmas, and that was very much in response to the particularly significant impact that the pandemic has had on community wet-led pubs. So we provided £1,000 emergency funding to 146 pubs located within Leicestershire's villages, and those that were particularly demonstrating a commitment to their communities that were going beyond and the level that one would normally expect. And the application included statements from those about their community support, and there were some pretty impressive examples of how important they are to their communities. Again, just a couple of quotes from some successful applicants, including Everard's, recognising, this is the county council perhaps going over and above what they would expect the council to be doing, and again in difficult circumstances. Place marketing, again over and above those specific skills or employment or business support, there is a need to look at place marketing. And I'll just pick out one particular point on here, in that the LEP investment panel met last week and have supported a bid for £185,000 to be spent on additional place marketing. So that will support tourism, business tourism, as well as inward investment through significant improvements to digital promotional material. So there's a lot of work happening. So that decision is still subject to a LEP board decision, but I think that will be successful and a really important component to the economic recovery activity that the county leads. Broadband, again, has been referred to earlier in the meeting, but again forms a really important part of the short and certainly longer term support that the county provides to businesses within the county. There is work happening with Broadband Delivery UK, so BD UK, around some initiatives that would strengthen broadband delivery across the whole county, but particularly in the east, because of the inability, unfortunately, last year to secure a contractor for the Phase 4 contract. So there's lots of activity happening, as well as looking to potentially re-procure that phase, and conversations with BD UK are ongoing. We're also looking to increase take-up of broadband across the county, and through doing that, that improves and increases our gain share income to the council. Two quick slides, Chair, and then happy to take any questions. As we've developed our economic recovery activity, the connection to the council's commitment to climate emergency and the green economy issue more generally has been really prevalent, and we've set out within this report and in the Cabinet report a number of principles that we think we ought to adhere to as we develop economic recovery activity, and they're set out on that slide. Then for completeness, of course, alongside the economic recovery activity that the county is leading on and intends to lead, there's a significant amount of community support that's also been provided through the Leicestershire Communities Fund and working with our voluntary sector and people within our communities, and that's set out in the report and on that slide. So hopefully that wasn't too quick, Chair, but again, a quick whistle-stop tour through the paper, and of course happy to take any questions that members might have.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got two members with questions. Maggie Wright.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was just a question around broadband, actually, because in the east of the county, which affects my division, actually, we've failed to procure now on a few occasions. So it was interesting to hear Simon saying we'll go back and try and secure it. But how secure will we be this time? Because it just keeps happening to my businesses over here. Thank you.
Shall I answer that, Chair?
Yes, please. Yeah.
The conversations with BD UK are looking at different ways of procuring, because what we don't want to do is end up being in the same position again with going through an expensive procurement exercise only to be unsuccessful in securing a good contractor. So the items that were set out on that slide looked at some other ways of doing that. But there's also the Outside In programme that is the national scheme. And we had some positive conversations with BD UK at the end of last week around how that might support that work. And, we want to be ahead of the queue when that funding and the rules around that scheme come forward. So that's another area that we're looking to explore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's really good news. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Okay, and then Rosita.
Hi, Simon. I should be getting a job in Simon's team. Anyway, one of my issues was answered in relation. Maggie just raised that. I've also always got broadband issues. But before I ask you two questions I've got. I was wondering, all of this is really, really good stuff. And at county, we're doing such a lot of good stuff. All these initial things are getting lost in the big, scheme of things. And I was wondering, Simon, if you could maybe send out some emails on the individual items to councillors so we can actually circulate it. If you're looking at the community support, that is fantastic stuff. If we had even that slide just on an email to get it out to our contacts, it would be really good. Your Kickstart, again, yes, you have little links, but whoever goes onto a link, if you had an email, it would be really wonderful. Place marketing. So anyway, just a couple of emails wouldn't be a lot of work, but I think it would be really good to get our message out there. So now question. I'll start with the easy one first. Place marketing. It's all very well, but if you're doing place marketing, surely with now retail having really suffered for many years and people now started online shopping, it will really hit the retail market even more and long term. So what we are looking to, it is to get footfall into our market towns, etc. Therefore, you need attractions, attractive market towns and whatever. So how can place marketing dovetail into making sure we're having an agenda of raising the profile and making our market towns and whatever more attractive to get people back out from behind their computer when we are talking recovery in a few years? Now question two. Now, it's really wonderful that I believe we're the only one who are going from 6 months to 12 months on the Kickstart. But what are the timelines? Because at this moment, everybody is still behind the computer. Surely we need to tailor it so it has got some long-term effect when we are coming out of this terrible situation. And how does Work Plus fit into the Kickstart agenda? And with that, Simon, I'm done. Thank you and keep up the good work.
Okay. So do you want to respond to those?
Yeah, I might respond in reverse order if that's okay. So the Work Plus programme can absolutely put those that fall within the criteria for Kickstart in touch with those opportunities that either we're providing or other organisations are providing. So Kickstart is for 16 to 24-year-olds, but the Work Plus programme is a universal offer that anyone can access. So those that are 16 to 24 that demonstrate would benefit from the Kickstart programme, then we could put them in touch with them. So that's point one.
So we're dovetailing it, are we?
Absolutely, yeah. So one can lead to the other, and both will come forward hopefully at a similar time. So we're hoping Work Plus will come online as early as April, of course, subject to a Cabinet's decision in a couple of weeks' time. The Kickstart programme is dependent on DWP's rules and other bits, so there's a slightly longer lag perhaps to that. But we've already had conversations with our internal colleagues from each of the departments identifying 15 places for new jobs, and that's a requirement of Kickstart that we could identify, and each of the departments have been very positive about coming forward with those. So they have taken into account, though, the difficulty of supporting those furthest from the labour market or supporting care leavers when COVID conditions are still upon us. So the remote working conditions is going to make that more difficult. So I suspect that we will be recruiting those over a longer period, but we would look to want to start recruiting some of those initial posts that are suited to the current conditions pretty quickly.
It must be very difficult to support somebody and teaching them from behind a computer at their home. So I'm glad you just mentioned that has been taken on board, because that was another question I was going to ask.
And in terms of the funding proposal to Cabinet, there is money included within the business case to address exactly that point. There will be an overhead of managerial support to support those departments that are providing those placements, and that's something that would be borne by the corporate centre as opposed to the departments themselves. And then your last question about place marketing, that the funding that's just been secured has yet to be formally allocated to specific activities. I mean, it has been broadly bidded upon around sort of digital assets, so social media, video clips, or whatever it might be, in order to promote a broad range of opportunities within the county. And of course, that may well include specific opportunities to promote town centres as well. That's not yet been determined, but so in some ways it's a big chunk of money, but it needs to go across a broad range of opportunities, from inward investment over a slightly longer term to tourism, business tourism, as well as sort of market town promotion. So I think, as we and the place marketing organisation develops how it might spend that money, we can certainly keep a close look on how market towns can benefit from that funding.
That will be good, thank you. But also, I think it is a new way of looking, to be more innovative as well. Maybe we have to link technology with actually, getting people out there. But yes, thank you for your answer, Simon. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Michael Wyatt next.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. A number of small businesses, especially in Colville, where I am, wanting to diversify, and they're finding it extremely difficult to be able to find adequate funding. And I just wondered if the county was looking again at providing some sort of funding. I've spoken to the Business Gateway people, and they're saying they're overwhelmed by the amount of people who want support, and they're unable to do so. And one or two businesses have already told me they're just sitting it out, waiting till the situation is finished. They're going to take the grant and then they're going to close because they're not able to diversify now while they've got the opportunity to change their building, the way they work, and get their stock in ready for reopening. And I just wonder if there's any sort of help on the horizon for those sort of people, because they are finding it very difficult at the moment. I mean, I'm talking about your small businesses on the high streets especially. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay.
Just a quick response to that, Mr. Galton. So, I mean, the business recovery grant has now closed. So that has supported exactly the sorts of businesses Mr. Wyatt's describing, actually. So those that were requiring to diversify or to invest in their own properties or buildings to address the new challenges that the pandemic has presented to them. So we have, and the council's work has supported a lot of businesses that are described in that way. But again, I was going to refer to the Business Gateway. So they are, we know, taking lots of calls, and they're able to direct businesses to not only the fund since now closed, of course, to the County Council, but also to other funds that other parts of the public sector and private sector are providing as well. So, but there aren't any formal plans for a further business recovery fund coming from the County Council at this stage. Again, subject to any decision that Cabinet makes in a couple of weeks.
Is there a list or a way to access the other funding sources that are available? Is there a comprehensive list in one place?
There is, and the Business Gateway can provide that, but I can provide that to you. But of course, it's a constantly moving picture, though, so it would be out of date as soon as it was printed, I suspect. But the best advice, though, is to encourage businesses to contact the Business Gateway, and they will provide the latest up-to-date position on, subject to their own business circumstances, how best they can address the funding challenges that they've got.
Okay, Michael, can you advise people to go through the business gateway?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to, yeah, that's not a problem doing that, but I think members need to be aware that the funds actually depleted so quickly, and a lot of very small businesses actually didn't respond to looking at the idea of diversifying, not till now. Some of them are actually only considering now doing that because of the prolonged. They thought it was only going to be a short period of time. We was going to be, they were going to be closed, because everybody thought that. They didn't think it was going to be a year on, or even possibly another year. So yeah, I can certainly do that, but I think it's certainly something that it needs to be looked at again. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot more empty shops on the high streets.
Okay, thanks for that. I've got Dr. Rynan next.
Thank you, Chair, yes, and I thank Simon and for an excellent report. And I'm very pleased and join Rosita in saying that it's great that the Kickstart scheme is going to be 12 months, not 6 months. And as you say, the evidence is that 6 months would not be long enough. My question there, though, is yes, these have to be new jobs, and I'm absolutely convinced that within our own council, they will be real jobs and will be worth doing. How can we ensure that partner organisations beyond us, that these are real, genuine work placements with something meaningful to do and are not merely exploitative, and that there is some hope after these for these young people, either within that business or within that sector, and how do we evaluate that? So that was the first question. And then the other one, which is a similar sort of question, is Work Plus. I mean, my son's experience of probably every single employment, let's get you furthest from the labour market people into work, has been manifestly disappointing, with so many of them being paid by the process rather than the outcome. So I'm really pleased that Work Plus is going to be run by ourselves, because I think we probably will be more interested in the outcome than the process. But can I be assured that that's how we will evaluate this in the longer term?
Thank you, Dr. Rynan. Two really good questions, of course. The evaluation for any SME that we look to work with through the Kickstart Gateway arrangements would be assessed in two ways. One, we can make a judgment on who we want to work with, and secondly, it goes through DWP's processes. So again, I'm sure they will be highly vigilant to the issues that you've described as real challenges, and there will be some unscrupulous SMEs out there, I suspect, that aren't perhaps in it for quite the right reasons. So with the extended arrangements that we have in place, I think we can ensure that issue would be properly managed through ourselves and through DWP. And on the Work Plus arrangement, so that's going to be managed, again, subject to Cabinet's decision, through our Communities and Wellbeing and our Adult Learning Service and the Libraries Service. So that's where it will be managed. There will be interest across the whole county to make sure that that's governed properly, but I'm sure absolutely you'd agree that that's the right place for that to be managed, and would again alleviate any concerns we might have about the motives for how we support individuals coming forward to us.
Okay, Terry.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, and lastly, I've got Terry Richardson.
Thank you, Chair. Just a very quick plea from me. If we could please stop using the word market towns. The nearest town to my division is not a market town, but it's still the principal town of the area. It's taken me 2.5 years to get market town wording removed from the LEP industrial strategy. So I hope we're not trying to sneak it back, because these things are applicable to all towns, not just market towns.
Right, so just want to refer to towns. Okay. Yep. Okay. Right. Well, I'm sure they'll take that on board. So, will you evaluate this at the end, Simon, to look back and see how successful it's been?
Yes, absolutely. So both business cases have an evaluation section within them. So we will keep a close eye on how successful they're being throughout the period and at the end as well.
Right. Okay. Well, I haven't got any other comments, so I'll thank you for presenting the report today and for informing us about this project. And yeah, we look forward to seeing how it works out and how successful it is in due course. So that does complete the business this morning. I just need to respond to some of the criticisms that have been raised by members in the past about the length of the meetings. And just to say that the next meeting will take place on the 15th of March at 10:30. So I am aware that there has been some concerns raised about the length of meetings, and the commissioners and I have discussed this. This has not just been raised in the past, but it's unfortunately something that can't really be resolved, well, certainly not easily. We have agreed that it wouldn't be appropriate to reject items for consideration by the Commission in order to reduce the workload, nor would it be right to cut the length of the discussion on items, as this risks reducing the level of scrutiny currently undertaken and could weaken the process. The options available, therefore, are to continue to hold occasional full-day meetings as and when necessary, or to try and schedule additional meetings into the diary. This is something the commissioners and I will consider, and we constantly keep the work programme under review each month. To organise additional meetings at short notice can be problematic, given members' and officers' existing commitments. However, we've agreed that the current timetable would allow for an additional meeting to be organised for July. Currently, we have a meeting in June, early June, and then the next one isn't until early September. So what we propose to do is to arrange on a provisional basis, if it's necessary, to consider items which are not time sensitive, so that priority can be given to more pressing matters in the year, and hopefully therefore avoid making the meetings too long. So we'll schedule an additional meeting for July to be used if required. And of course, officers will be asked to keep presentations as brief as possible to ensure sufficient time is given for questions. And I think we've seen that this morning, tighter presentations. However, members are asked, if you do have any questions for clarification or anything that comes to your mind when you're going through the papers, you can raise those directly with officers in advance of the meeting. And this will ensure we're able to focus on questions and comments, and that obviously are carrying out our role as scrutiny and providing the challenge. So that's a response, a considered response, which, as I say, we looked at this in a number of ways, and we're all in agreed that we don't think we should try and restrict the meetings to a certain time, because we just wouldn't be doing our job properly, but put in place what I've suggested this morning and see how it goes. Has anybody got any comments or questions on that? Otherwise, we can conclude the meeting.
Yes, I have, Simon. If the chairs of the individual other scrutiny panels could please also put that to their panel members, so it is all that everybody knows we're singing from the same hymn sheet, but also it's very well, most people know this already, but to reiterate the point that they can approach officers directly if they have any questions. And thank you all for attending, and thank you, Simon.
Okay, right, thank you very much. So we'll close the meeting at 13:38 and look forward to seeing you again on the 15th of March. Meeting closed.